My brother, sister, and I spent every summer at Grandma Ellis's house when we were kids, and we loved it. My mom said that this was the Ellis family home. It had been in our family for generations. Built by my great-grandfather in the 1800s. It sat on 5 acres of land, about 10 miles outside the city, far enough to feel like another world, surrounded by woods so dense that they seemed to swallow the sunlight. As a kid, I felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. The area that surrounded my grandma's house was a popular recreation spot for people who wanted to utilize the hiking trails and the remote camping sites to be isolated from the city and the noise. The house itself was a beautiful Victorian farmhouse, painted white with blue shutters. Inside was everything you would imagine a grandma's house to be. Polished wood, handmade quilts, and the walls covered in old family photos. When you entered through the front door, you were always greeted with the soft sounds of Grandma's old record player, playing her favorite tunes, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies and lavender. And Grandma Ellis was everything you'd expect in a grandmother. She had a soft, sweet voice that wrapped around you like a warm blanket. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled in a soft bun, and her clothes were neat and pressed, even when she was gardening. She had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she spoke to you. And no matter how bad of a day you were having, when she smiled at you, you knew that you were loved. She was perpetually baking something, and she was always ready with a story. We loved it when she would tell us family stories, how her father was a respected doctor in town, how her grandfather had built this house with his own hands, and how the Ellis name was one of the oldest in the county. Sometimes while telling those family stories, Grandma's voice would change, just slightly. Her eyes would focus on something distant, and for a moment, she seemed like a different person entirely. But then she'd blink, smile that warm smile, and the moment would pass. There was always a strange pride in her voice when she spoke about the family legacy. She'd tell us how our ancestors were survivors, who did what needed to be done when times were tough, and how Ellis family members had a special strength that others didn't understand. Grandma had 2 very strict rules at her house. The first rule, never go past the property line, into the woods behind the house. People disappear in there, she'd say, her eyes suddenly distant. Your grandpa went for a walk in those woods and never came back. Those woods had a presence to them. Even on bright summer days, they seemed to watch the house. The tree line was a perfect dark boundary, as if the forest had decided exactly how close it would allow civilization to come. Sometimes when I was standing at the property's edge, I'd swear I could hear whispers from within those trees. Grandma would always appear then, as if sensing my curiosity, gently pulling me back towards the house. I remember asking her about Grandpa once. She wouldn't say much, just that they had only been married for a few years when he went missing. She was 28 when it happened. The few times I'd pressed for more details, Grandma would get this strange look. It wasn't quite sadness. It was something harder. The second rule at Grandma's house: never open the red door at the end of the hallway upstairs. She never explained that one. She would only say, "That door stays closed. It's not for children." Something in her tone made us never ask twice. Unlike the other white doors in the house, the red door seemed out of place, like it belonged to another house entirely. It was smaller than the others, made of heavier wood, with an old skeleton keyhole that fascinated me. Once, I pressed my ear against it, holding my breath, convinced I heard movement on the other side. When I turned around, Grandma was watching me from the end of the hall. Her face was unreadable. As kids, we didn't question these rules. That's all we ever knew. We were happy with having the run of the house, the sprawling garden, and the tire swing by the old oak tree. We were content to spend our days catching fireflies, playing hide and seek, and listening to Grandma's stories on the front porch swing. I was different than my siblings, more curious, more intense. Where they were content to play in the yard, I wanted to explore every corner of the property and every inch of the house. I collected things, like interesting rocks, unusual feathers, and a dead butterfly I had found in the windowsill that I kept in a jar for weeks. Grandma noticed. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with an odd expression, something between pride and worry. As I got older, sometimes I'd find myself sitting on the old tire swing, staring off into the woods beyond the property line in the back of the house, or tracing my finger along the ornate door handle and skeleton keyhole of the red door, just wondering what it was about them that was so forbidden. But I adored my grandma, and the fear of disappointing her was always stronger than my curiosity. She loved us all, that was obvious, but I always felt like her and I had a special connection. I couldn't quite explain it, but there was a very strong bond between us. We never talked about it, but I knew she felt it too. I could see it in her smile, and the way she spent just a little more time with just me. Once, when I was 12, I found her in her study, looking through an old photo album. When she saw me, she quickly closed it, but not before I glimpsed a strange expression on her face. Almost like guilt. "Some memories are just for me," she said, touching my cheek. Then she added, "You remind me so much of myself at your age." The way she said it didn't sound entirely like a compliment. Eventually, the summers at Grandma's house stopped. We were getting older, first high school, then college, and then life got in the way. We'd try to visit on holidays, but those golden summers belong to our childhood now. That was until a few months ago, when Grandma died in her sleep at 92, and everything I thought I knew about her, about our family, changed forever. As the oldest grandchild, I volunteered to clean out the house. My mom was devastated and needed time to grieve. My siblings offered to help, but they had families and jobs that don't allow for extended leave. I'm in between jobs right now, a freelance writer with too much time on my hands and not enough assignments. So I came back to the house alone. It was early spring. The trees were just beginning to bud. The air carried that earthy scent of thawing ground. As I drove up the winding gravel driveway, the house came into view, and I felt this strange mixture of nostalgia and unease. It looked smaller than I remembered. It was weathered. The white paint was peeling in some places, and the blue shutters had faded to a dull gray. But something else had changed too. The house seemed to have settled into itself somehow, as if it had been holding its breath for all these years and finally exhaled. I used the spare key that Grandma had kept hidden in the flower pot next to the front step. The lock resisted at first, but then suddenly gave way with a sound almost like a sigh. As I stepped through the front door, the air felt thick and undisturbed. The dust motes hung suspended in the afternoon light streaming through the windows, spinning slowly as I passed through them. The house was exactly as I remembered as a kid. The same floral wallpaper, the same creaking floors, the same grandfather clock in the hallway that was still ticking away as if Grandma had just wound it. But it felt different without her. Empty, quiet. No sounds of cookies being taken out of the oven, or Grandma's favorite tunes being played on the record player. The fact that she was really gone was starting to sink in. I could feel the lump in my throat forming, and my eyes started to water with tears. I'd planned to stay for a week, maybe 2. I didn't have anywhere pressing to be, and this would give me plenty of time to sort through her belongings and decide what to keep, what to donate, and what to sell. The realtor wanted to list the property by the end of the month. I put my bags down on the bed in Grandma's room. The beds were way too small in the other bedrooms, and I wasn't a kid anymore. If I was going to be here for a whole week, I wanted to be able to spread out a bit. As I was hanging my clothes up in her closet, I found a shoebox pushed to the back. It was filled with newspaper clippings. Most of them were faded with age, but they all shared a theme: missing persons reports, hikers who'd never returned from the woods, or campers who had disappeared without a trace, all from this area, and spanning decades. "Grandma, you morbid old lady," I muttered, closing the box. She must have collected them because of what happened to Grandpa, and just ended up feeding her fear of the woods. I set the box aside, making a mental note to throw it out later. No need to show Mom something that would only upset her further. The first night, though, I barely slept. The house was making strange noises, creaking, settling, the pipes groaning. Normal old house sounds, but without Grandma's presence, they seemed ominous. And then I had the strangest dream. I was 10 years old again, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the red door, just staring at it. But in my dream, Grandma wasn't telling me to stay away. Instead, she was standing behind me, with her hand on my shoulder, like she wanted me to open the door. In the dream, the door began to leak. Not water, but something darker, thicker. It pooled around my small legs, soaking into my clothes. And still, Grandma urged me closer. "Put your ear to the door," she said. "Listen to them. Listen to their screams." I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. For a moment, I could have sworn I smelled Grandma's lavender perfume in the room. And despite the closed windows, a cold draft swept across my face, as if someone had just passed by the bed. The next morning, the sunlight draining in through the curtains made that nightmare seem silly. I made coffee and took it to the front porch, just like Grandma used to do, every morning. The property looked different in the spring than it had during our summer visits. The garden was overgrown, the flower beds choked with weeds. The old tire swing hung motionless from the oak tree, its rope frayed and weathered. And the woods? The woods seemed closer somehow. Had they always extended so far into the eastern edge of the property? I didn't remember the tree line curving inward like that. That afternoon, I drove into town for groceries. The small market hadn't changed much since my childhood visits. Same standard food choices, the same narrow aisles. The elderly cashier squinted at me as she rung up my items. "You're Millie's granddaughter, aren't you? Staying out at her place?" I nodded, making small talk about being there to sort out Grandma's affairs. "Alone?" she asked, her scanner pausing over a can of soup. When I confirmed this, she pressed her lips together. "That's a lot of house for one person, especially in Ellis." "What do you mean, especially in Ellis?" I asked. She seemed to catch herself. Just that it's a big old place with a lot of history, that's all. Your grandmother managed it because, well, she was your grandmother." What was that supposed to mean? I knew my grandma was a tough lady. I mean, she never remarried, and once all the kids were grown and off to college, she had lived in that house all by herself. As I carried the groceries out to the car, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Just checking in. Is everything okay at the house? Don't forget Grandma's rule about the woods." I texted back that everything was fine. I wanted to tell her about the strange dream I had, but something told me to keep that to myself. By the third day, I had fallen into a routine. I'd work through one room at a time, sorting Grandma's belongings into 3 neat piles: keep, donate, and trash. It was emotional work. Every object held a memory. The cookie jar she always kept full, the reading glasses she'd perched on the end of her nose, the collection of spoons she had all around the living room. By that afternoon, I decided to tackle the fireplace in the living room. It needed cleaning. It was full of ashes from Grandma's last fire. As I scraped them out, I noticed one of the bricks at the back was loose. It wobbled when my brush hit it. Curious, I pried it out, my fingers catching on the rough edges. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside the cavity was a key. Not a modern key, an old skeleton key, black iron with an ornate handle, the kind of key you'd read about in a Gothic novel. Its teeth were intricate, designed for a complex lock, and the handle was formed in the shape of what looked like a bird with outstretched wings. I knew instantly what had opened: the red door. I sat there on the hearth, key in hand, my heart racing. Why would Grandma hide the key to that door? What could possibly be up there that needed to be locked away? For a moment, I considered respecting her wishes, putting the key back, and letting whatever secret she had up there die with her. But I couldn't. The mystery of that door had haunted me for years, burning inside me since childhood. There was almost a physical need to know what was behind it. I closed my fist around the key, feeling its cold metal slowly warm against my palm. It's just an old attic, I told myself. Just storage, old furniture, probably family heirlooms. But if that were true, why hide the key? Why make a rule that no one would ever open that door? I had to know. The red door stood stoic at the end of the upstairs hallway, just as I'd remembered it, smaller than the other doors, positioned right under the slope of the roof. The paint was a deep crimson, like dried blood against the pale yellow walls. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The key was ice cold in my palm, my breath shaky as I slid it into the old lock. The red door groaned and swung open, revealing a set of narrow stairs disappearing into the darkness. I told myself I was being ridiculous. What could possibly be up there? But as I took that first step, the floorboards creaking beneath me, I had this sudden suffocating feeling that something wasn't right. The stairs were steep and narrow. The wood groaned under my weight. At the top of the stairs was another door. This one unpainted. It opened into what was clearly an attic space, the ceiling sloping on both sides, the air thick with dust, and something else, a faint coppery smell I couldn't quite place. Light filtered weakly through a small circular window, illuminating what appeared to be some kind of workspace. A desk against one wall, some filing cabinets, and in the center of the room, a single wooden chair, facing a wall covered in papers. I approached slowly, squinting in the dim light. On the wall was a large map, surrounded by newspaper clippings and photographs, like something from a detective movie. I spotted a light switch by the door and flipped it on. What I saw made my blood run cold. The map was of Grandma's property in the surrounding woods. It was marked with red X's, and next to each X, a date, a name, sometimes a photo. Missing hikers, campers, or locals who'd taken a wrong turn, all vanished near Grandma's property. The wall was a meticulous record of disappearances, dozens of them, spanning decades. Newspaper clippings with headlines like "Search continues for missing campers" and "Local man vanishes without a trace" were pinned to the wall surrounding the map. And Polaroids. The Polaroids showed faces, terrified faces of people I didn't recognize, men and women of different ages. Some looked like they had been taken somewhere out in the woods, and others looked like they had been taken in this very attic. They were pinned near the locations marked with those red X's on the map. What was I looking at? I was so confused. What was she doing with all of this? For one desperate moment, I tried to construct another explanation. Maybe Grandma was tracking a killer. Maybe she was trying to solve these disappearances. I frantically started looking around the room. I needed something that would give me some kind of explanation, something that would give me answers. My hands trembling, I opened one of the filing cabinets, and inside were folders, each labeled with a name and a date. Some were the same names from the wall. I pulled out one at random. Inside were more photos and personal effects. A detailed account written in Grandma's neat handwriting, describing how she'd followed them for days, learning their routines, and how she'd approached them with a story about her dog being lost in the woods, or how they were lost and asked her for help, how they followed her willingly, and how she'd watched as the light left their eyes. The clinical detachment of her descriptions was almost as horrifying as the acts themselves. I couldn't read anymore. I slammed the folder shut. Then I found a locked drawer in the desk. The skeleton key from my pocket fit into this lock too. Inside were trophies, a wedding ring, a college class pin, a man's watch still ticking, and a small glass vial containing what looked like a human tooth, each labeled, each dated, and each corresponding to a name on the wall or in the filing cabinet. And then I saw it, a yellowed newspaper clipping, local man missing, wife claims no knowledge of whereabouts. Below it was a photo of Grandpa. His face had been scratched out with such violence that the photo paper was torn. She'd done it. She killed Grandpa. My whole body went cold. This couldn't be real, and yet the evidence was overwhelming. There was no more room for denial. I sank into the chair, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My sweet cookie-baking Grandma was a serial killer. As the truth dawned on me, my body rebelled. My stomach heaved, and I barely made it to the wastebasket in the corner before vomiting. The taste of bile in my mouth seemed fitting, my body purging itself of these lies it had been fed my entire life. I couldn't stop shaking, not just my hands now, but my entire body, as if I was freezing from the inside out. Sweat beaded on my forehead while my teeth chattered. And then I noticed a leather-bound book on the desk, different from everything else. It was labeled simply, Family. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a meticulous family tree, dating back to the 1850s. But this wasn't an ordinary genealogy. Next to certain names were tallies, numbers. And I realized with growing horror that these were victim counts. Great-great-grandmother Elizabeth Ellis, 17 tally marks. Great-grandfather Thomas Ellis, 8 tally marks. Grandma's father, William Ellis, 23 marks. An aunt I had never heard of, Judith Ellis, 4 marks, with the words caught and executed in 1964 written beside her name. And Grandma herself, 31 marks and counting. Not everyone in the family tree had these markings. My mother's name was in there, but it was clean, no marks. The family book revealed patterns I couldn't ignore. Great-great-grandmother Elizabeth had started as a nurse during the Civil War. Her first victims were wounded soldiers who would not be missed. Great-grandfather Thomas started his killing spree at 28, the same age Grandma was when Grandpa disappeared. Each Ellis killer seemed to have their own method, their own ritual. Great-grandfather Thomas drowned his victims in a lake that had since dried up. Grandma's father, the doctor, used poisons that mimicked natural causes. Grandma had perfected the use of the woods, making her victims' disappearances seem like tragic accidents. Is that why she kept us away from the woods? Not to protect us, but to protect her secret? The woods didn't claim those people. My grandmother did, just as her father had before her, and his mother before him. It was a family business, a family curse. Most disturbing were the notations beside each name, not just numbers, but words. Reluctant, eager, natural. The Ellis family had categorized their murderous tendencies, like wine connoisseurs rating vintages, and next to Grandma's name was written simply, the best of us all. Why? How? The loving woman who I'd spent so much of my childhood with, who'd bandaged my scraped knees and taught me how to bake bread. How could she be this monster? I caught my reflection in the window glass, my face pale and eyes wide. I looked away and then looked back, and just for a moment, I thought I saw Grandma's face looking back at me instead of mine. The same eyes, the same bone structure, the same intensity. I'd always been proud of looking like her, of being her favorite, a special bond that we shared. Now I wondered if what she saw in me wasn't love, but recognition, the same darkness, waiting to emerge. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the attic seemed to be closing in. The faces on the Polaroids watched me. Their disembodied voices were whispering in my head. I had to get out of here, away from this house, away from all of this, away from this curse. But as I stood to leave, a final, terrible thought struck me. I had her blood in my veins. I had her eyes, and I had her curiosity. What else of hers did I have, dormant inside of me? And now that I had opened the red door, would it awaken? I stumbled down the attic stairs, nearly falling in my haste. I slammed the red door shut behind me as if I could lock away the truth. Back in my room, I threw my belongings into my suitcase. I couldn't stay in this house another minute. Childhood memories came flooding through my mind. They were lies, all lies. But as I was packing, I noticed something on the bedside table that I hadn't seen before. A small leather-bound book, Grandma's diary. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have just left. But I didn't. The entries were sporadic and mundane at first. Daily activities, garden notes, recipes. And then I found entries about us, her grandchildren, how she loved our summer visits, and how she worried about us, how she wondered if we carried what she called the family darkness. As I flipped further through the diary, I found entries spanning decades. One entry from 1982 read, "Mother would be proud of how careful I've become. Not like Judith, who got sloppy and was caught. Not like Father, who couldn't control his urges and had to be handled. I've learned from their mistakes." Another entry from 1991. I found a box of great-grandmother's things in the basement today. Newspaper clippings about missing persons dating back to the 1890s. So it goes back even further than Mother told me. 5 generations at least. Always the firstborn. Always manifesting in the late 20s. I wonder if it's something in our blood or something darker. Then an entry about her own daughter, my mother. Margaret isn't showing any signs of the darkness, thank God. It skipped her completely, but I fear that her children may not be so fortunate. The final entry was dated earlier this year. I've watched them all these years, my grandchildren, looking for signs. The boy has his father's temper, but nothing more sinister. The younger girl is gentle to a fault. But the eldest, I see myself in her, that same curiosity, that same intensity, those moments when her eyes go distant, focused on something others can't see. It started for me at 25. She's 28 now. I pray that I'm wrong. I dropped the diary horrified. What was she saying? That this sickness was hereditary? That she thought I might have it too? That's ridiculous. It's insane. I grabbed my suitcase and fled down the stairs. I needed to get out. I needed to get away from this house and its secrets. As I reached the front door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize my own face. There was something different in my eyes. Something cold. Something dark. I blinked and it was gone. I left Grandma's house that day, never wanting to come back. I couldn't bear to set foot in that place again. When I got back to my apartment, I called the realtor and told them to stop everything. We weren't going to be selling the house. I couldn't let anyone move in there. I haven't told my mom or my siblings what I found. How could I? How do I tell them that Grandma was a monster? That the warm, safe house of our childhood was hiding something horrific? For the first week, I barely slept. Nightmares plagued me. Faces of my grandma's victims reaching out to me. The red door creaking open. The woods whispering my name. By the second week, the nightmares had stopped, but in their place was something way worse. Dreams. Dreams where I was walking through the woods, following someone. No, stalking someone, feeling a strange excitement I'd never known before. I'd wake up not with fear, but with disappointment that the dream had ended. I told myself it was just trauma, post-traumatic stress. It had to be a normal reaction to an abnormal discovery, right? Nothing more. It's been 3 weeks now. I should be feeling better and getting back to normal, but I'm not. I've been researching our family history, public records and newspaper archives, genealogy sites even. Everywhere the Ellis family had lived, there were disappearances and unsolved murders, going back generations. And now I'm 28, around the same age Grandma was when she killed Grandpa, the age where the darkness starts to take over. Sometimes late at night, I find myself thinking about that wall of victims, about the meticulous records and hidden trophies. But instead of disgust, I feel something else. Admiration? I can't stop thinking about it. The planning, the precision, the perfect crimes that no one ever solved. Sometimes I catch myself standing in front of the mirror, studying my reflection, looking for her in my face. for the Ellis family eyes that Grandma said were a mark of our bloodline. I've taken up a new interest in researching missing persons cases, but the interest is going way beyond academic. I started following news stories about hikers who ventured into remote areas, calculating how long it would take for someone to be reported missing. I threw away my kitchen knives and then bought new ones, better ones, sharper. I told myself it was because I was cooking more. And then my appearance began to change. I lost weight, my skin became pale, my movements are more deliberate, precise. One morning I noticed a strand of silver in my hair, exactly like Grandma's. I didn't color it. I liked it. No, this isn't me. This can't be me. I'm trying to fight it, but yesterday I found something in my pocket. I don't even remember putting it there. I don't remember taking it from the house. It was the key to the red door. As I stood on the front porch of that old Victorian farmhouse, with the peeling white paint and the faded blue shutters, I called my mom to tell her that I wanted to keep Grandma's house. I wanted to keep it in the family. "Are you sure, honey?" she asked with concern in her voice. "That place is so isolated." "I'm sure," I said. "I think I belong here." After hanging up, I went to the red door. It doesn't frighten me anymore. Instead, it calls to me. I catch myself humming Grandma's favorite songs as I work. I understand her now. The careful planning, the meticulous documentation. It was the ritual of it all. Last night, a hiker got lost near the property. I found him wandering disoriented near the tree line as darkness was falling. "Thank God," he said when he saw me. "I've been lost for hours." I smiled Grandma's smile. "You poor thing. Let me help you." I grew up in a town with one rule. It was a rule that everyone followed, but no one would ever explain why. Never look at the man in the hat. Every night at exactly midnight, he walks down Main Street, always from the old post office to the abandoned train station. Same path, same pace, every single night. No one knows where he came from, and no one knows why he's here. All we know is this: if you see him, keep walking. Don't stop, don't look, and don't acknowledge him in any way, because the moment you do, well, we don't really know what happens, because everyone who's broken the rule has disappeared. Our town sits in a valley, surrounded by these hills that tend to trap the fog that rolls in most evenings. The streets get unusually quiet after dark. Not just empty, but silent, like the town itself is holding its breath. Our town is a decent size, but still small enough that everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows the rule. But it's not like this was something that was taught to us in school. There were no official warnings or no signs posted around the town. It was knowledge that seemed to seep into your consciousness, like how you know not to touch a hot stove or walk into traffic. Never look at the man in the hat. There are whispers and rumors about when he first appeared. Some say it was after the old train station closed in the 50s, while others claim he's been walking this path since before the town was founded. My grandfather once let it slip that there were others before him, but then he shut down and got defensive when I asked what he meant. Even my parents never discussed it with us directly. They would just be sure to remind us that if we ever went out, to make sure that we were home before dark. And even though there were no breaking news alerts or taped off crime scenes like you see on TV, we always knew when someone had broken the rule because my mom would basically turn into a prison warden, and we would only be allowed to go to school and back unless she was with us. But that's it. They were never covered on the local news, or even made the local paper. When I was 10, the miller's son, David, came to school one day and told us all that he had seen him, that he had looked at the man in the hat. We were all just enamored, crowding around his desk at recess. What did he look like? What happened? We all wanted to know. But as soon as the teacher caught wind of it, she shut the conversation down so fast it gave us whiplash. Her face had gone pale, and she sent David to the principal's office. The next day I saw David, he cornered me by the lockers. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around like he was watching something move that I couldn't see.
"He doesn't have a face,"
David whispered. his voice cracking.
But he can still see you. He's looking at me right now.
I glanced around the empty hallway, feeling a chill despite it being so warm that day. David, there's nobody here. We all, of course, thought he was lying. No one has ever lived to tell anyone what has happened after they've seen the man in the hat. But over the next few days, David didn't look good. He looked like he hadn't slept. And it was the same the next day. He looked like a zombie. He was paranoid and kept distracting the class, thinking he was seeing things out of the window or in the corner of the room. That was the last day he came to school. After that, the Millers were gone. Their house was empty, not vacant like someone had moved out, empty like they had just vanished. The framed photos still hung on the walls, dinner plates were left on the table, and the car was still in the driveway. But the Millers? They were gone. Everyone knew why, even though no one would say it out loud. David really had looked at the man in the hat. When I was 14, Miss Winters, our English teacher, she had assigned us to write about local folklore. Tommy Blake tried to write about the man in the hat. The next day, Miss Winters announced a change in curriculum. Tommy's parents pulled him out of school for a week, and when he came back, he wouldn't talk about it. His essay topic had mysteriously changed to migration patterns of local birds. I think there was always this rebellious part of me that wanted to believe it was just small-town superstition, a boogeyman the adults invented to keep us kids in line. But the fear was real. You could see it in the way people walked a little bit faster past the empty intersections when it got dark, or how store clerks would glance at the clock nervously as closing time approached, and how the streetlights flickered just a little too often on that same block of Main Street. Even if nobody actually believed in him, everybody thought about him. I remember as I got older, I wanted to go to a late movie with my friends. My mom and my grandma were sitting in the living room when my grandma shot up off the sofa and started lecturing me on being out at night.
If you ever hear footsteps behind you at night, keep walking. Never ever stop.
My mother nervously dismissed her, told her she was just trying to scare me with her old folk tales. But those words stuck with me, burned in the back of my mind, until the night I broke the rule and I looked at the man in the hat. I never meant to be out late. I'm an adult now. I've lived in this town my whole life, followed the rule, and kept my head down. I work at the library, quiet and predictable. Every weekday I'm home by 6, and weekends I might stay out until 9 or 10 with friends, but always home before the streets are empty. But that Friday was different. My college roommate was visiting from out of town, and we lost track of time at the Rusty Nail catching up over beers. When I checked my watch, it was 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes. That's all the time I had to get home, a 20-minute walk. I told her I needed to go, nearly knocking over my chair as I got up. She laughed, confused. "What's the rush? One more drink?" She wasn't from here. She didn't know. "I can't," I told her as I was pulling on my jacket. I need to get home." Her smile faltered. "You're acting weird. Is everything okay?" How could I explain that her town lives in fear of a shadow that walks at midnight? That we organize our entire lives around avoiding this thing that might not even exist? "It's complicated," was all I said. "Town things." As I walked out the door, I was hoping to see more people out, but the streets were empty. Everyone who lived here knew better than to be out now. The fog had rolled in thick that night, wrapping around the street lamps like ghostly fingers. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. I started out walking fast, and before I knew it, I was jogging. My apartment was on Oak Street. It's a good 15 blocks away. Just as I reached the corner of Main and Elm, the town clock chimed. I froze. It was midnight, and I was standing right in the middle of his path. I should have run, or crossed the street, or ducked into an alley, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, like my feet had suddenly taken root into the concrete. The air grew colder so I could see my breath. The street lamps started to dim, as if shrinking away from what was coming. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the hurried footsteps of someone trying to get home. These were measured, deliberate. The sound of hard-soled shoes on pavement, walking with mechanical precision. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind.
If you ever hear footsteps behind you at night, keep walking. Never ever stop.
But I had stopped, and now he was coming. I forced myself to move, continuing down Main Street, my shoulders hunched. Just get home, I thought. Don't turn around. The footsteps continued behind me, not speeding up, but not slowing down. Always the same distance apart, and always the same distance behind me. As I passed under the streetlights, they flickered. One by one, they dimmed and then brightened, like they were taking labored breaths. I was still trying to convince myself I was imagining it, that the stories were just getting to me or that I'd had too much to drink. It was probably just another person from the bar realizing what time it was and trying to get home quickly too. But then, as I passed by the old barber shop on Main, its large storefront window caught my reflection as I walked by. And his. A tall, thin figure in a wide-brimmed hat. His form was darker than the darkness around him, like he was somehow pulling the shadows towards him. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette of the hat, a long coat, and emptiness where his face should be. My heart stopped. He was real. I almost started freaking out, but I needed to keep my cool. I bit my lips so hard I tasted the blood, forcing myself not to react, not to turn, not to acknowledge him. Just keep walking. 3 more blocks to my apartment. 3 more blocks and I'd be safe. But then the footsteps stopped, and so did I, almost automatically, like my body was no longer under my control. And I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, a lifetime of wondering if he was really real and what he really looked like. Maybe it was defiance, tired of living in fear of something I'd never seen. Or maybe it was just the simple human instinct, the need to face what's hunting you. But for whatever reason, I turned around, and there he was, standing beneath a street lamp. Though the light seemed unable to touch him, his figure was too tall and his posture too still. The wide brim of his hat cast a shadow where his face should be. And even though the light was directly above him, he still looked like a shadow. And for one terrible moment, nothing happened. And then he took a single step towards me. No, not a step. More like the space between us just simply shortened. And just like that, in an instant, he was right in front of me. The street lamp above us flickered once, twice, and then went out. The sudden plunge into darkness snapped me back into reality. My body finally remembered how to move, and I stumbled backwards and fell on my ass. I tried not to, but again, I looked. I looked up at his face and tried to reassure myself that this guy, this man, was human. And as I stared up at him, he tilted his head just slightly. And though I still couldn't see his face, I knew he was smiling. I could feel it, like something was stretching or twisting in the void beneath that shadowed hat. I shot up off the ground and started running for my home, running for my life. I slammed my apartment door behind me, locked it, chained it, and dragged a chair in front of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I turned on every light, checked every window, and closed every blind. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I'd escaped. And slowly, I approached the front window that looked out over the street in front of the building, pulling the curtain back just slightly. He was there, standing motionless on the sidewalk in front of my building. The same dark silhouette, the same wide-brimmed hat, his face still hidden in a shadow. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, looking up at my window, looking at me. I dropped the curtain and backed away until I hit the opposite wall. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I gathered the courage to peek outside, he was still there. And the next night too, and the next. And by the 4th day, I started doubting my own sanity. I called in sick to work and stopped answering my texts. I sat in my living room with the blinds drawn, jumping at every creak and shadow. He's not real, I whispered to myself over and over. He can't be real. But each night when I checked, there he stood, patient, waiting, as if it meant nothing to him. I started wondering if I was already gone, if my disappearance had already happened, and I just didn't know it yet. It didn't matter if I left my apartment or took a different route home. No matter where I went, he was always there, standing at the entrance to my building, standing across the street when I left work, silhouetted against the glow of a street lamp when I went to the store. He never got any closer, but he never moved farther away. He was always watching. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. But on the 7th night, when I looked out the window to check, he was gone. For the first time in a week, the sidewalk was empty. He wasn't there. I should have felt relieved, but instead, an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. I heard the familiar sound of my bathroom door in the hallway slowly opening. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. I took a step towards the bathroom. My pulse was hammering in my ears. It was too dark. The hallway light, which I had kept on all week, was off now. The apartment felt different. The air was thick, it was suffocating. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. But where was I going to go? There was nowhere to go. I took a slow, shaking step forward, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness of the hallway. I reached for the light switch, but when my fingers found it, it wouldn't work. I turned my head slightly, my breath coming out in shallow gasps. The light in my living room was off now too. But when I turned back, I saw him, standing in the bathroom doorway at the end of the hall. The man in the hat was inside my home. He didn't move, but somehow I knew he was smiling. The shadows beneath his hat stretched and shifted like ink swirling in water. And then he took a step forward. I stepped back until my spine hit the wall. I had nowhere to go. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why me?" He took another step. The darkness around him seemed to pulse, to breathe. I tried to scream, but my throat locked tight. My body refused to obey. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, smooth, almost normal.
"You've seen me. Now no one will see you."
The lights flickered back on, and he was gone. At first I thought it was over. I had just collapsed on the floor, relief washing over me. And then my phone rang. It was my mother. I had missed our weekly dinner. "Hello," I answered, my voice still shaking. But she just kept talking, as if she couldn't hear me. "Hello, are you there? Hello?" I shouted into the phone. Nothing. She hung up and called back, left a voicemail saying she was worried. An hour later, she came to my door with my landlord. I stood right in front of them, screaming, waving my arms. They walked right through me.
The car is still here,
My mother said, looking around my apartment.
The TV's still on? They couldn't have just disappeared.
But I had. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm still here in my apartment. I can't leave. I've tried, and something pulls me back every time I reach the front door, like an invisible tether. I watched my mom put up missing person posters with my face on them on the lamppost in front of my apartment, but others from town would just come right behind her and take them down. They all knew what happened, and they weren't going to talk about it. No one was going to talk about it, except my mom, but eventually she gave up. Last week I watched my best friend sort through my belongings. She picked up the photo of us from graduation and traced her finger over my face and broke down crying. I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders, but she couldn't feel it, speaking words that she couldn't hear. The worst part isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by the people you love and they can't see you, watching life continue without you, seeing how quickly the world adapts to you being gone. Yesterday they packed my things. My mother cried the whole time. And tomorrow, someone new will move in, and I'll be here, watching them live their life, unable to speak to them, and unable to warn them. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of others like me, a flicker in the corner of my eye or a shadow that doesn't quite match the light, a cold spot in the otherwise warm room. I wonder if they're all here, everyone who's ever broken the rule. Invisible crowds walking through the streets alongside the living, all of us watching, but none of us seen, all of us collected by the man in the hat. So I'm recording this, not that anyone will ever see it, not that anyone will ever hear it, but at least I've told my story, and at least someone might understand what actually happens when you look at the man in the hat. You don't die, but you do vanish, become a ghost in your own life forever. Sometimes at night, I see him walking past my window, that familiar silhouette, and I know that son of a bitch sees me watching, because he always tips his hat, just slightly, just enough to acknowledge another soul that he's collected. So if you ever find yourself in my town, remember the rule. Never look at the man in the hat, or you'll end up like me, telling your story to an empty room. Forever. I didn't come out here to run away. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Rock bottom has a way of sneaking up on you. 1 minute you're managing your anxiety. The next you're having your third panic attack in your therapist's office, while she calmly writes down words like dissociative episodes and potential psychosis. Dr. Levinson gave me 2 choices. Start taking my mental health seriously, or she was putting me on an inpatient hold. Option 1 seemed like the obvious choice, even for someone as stubborn as me. When the walls of your mind start closing in, sometimes you need distance to see things clearly, she said, scribbling me a new prescription with a higher dosage. You need to disconnect, to reset, she said as she handed me the prescription. So I took her advice, and, as usual, I went right off the deep end with it. I booked a cabin deep in the woods. No phone signal, no people, no modern distractions. Just me, my meds, and all the thoughts I'd been running from for years. It took me 7 hours to get here. The GPS died during the last hour, leaving me to navigate with the handwritten directions the owner had emailed me. I followed creeks and counted wooden bridges until the road narrowed to a dirt path that seemed to fold in on itself. The cabin was smaller than the picture showed, It was not cozy rustic, but more like neglected and forgotten. The porch sagged on one side and creaked under my weight. A wind chime made of deer antlers hung motionless by the door, even though I could feel the breeze on my skin. The owner had given me a pretty big discount, because it was late in the fall and this place didn't rent out all that much. No kidding. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the door. It was musty, with undertones of something sharp and animal-like, the kind of smell that makes the back of your throat itch. Inside, dust floated in the thin shafts of the afternoon light. The wooden floor complained beneath my feet, each board with its own unique groan. I kept getting the weird feeling that the boards were trying to warn me about something. The walls were lined with hunting trophies, faded photos of men with dead animals, rifles mounted like crosses, and a collection of knives with yellowed bone handles. A mounted deer head dominated the far wall. Its glass eyes seemed to track me as I moved around the room. Obviously, this was a hunting cabin, but my experience with hunting began and ended with the Big Buck Hunter arcade game at my favorite downtown bar. No way was I qualified to be out here. On the kitchen table, I found a handwritten list with 5 rules. 1. Pack out all your trash. 2. No pets unless they're hunting dogs. They sleep outside. 3. No emergency services nearby. Use the satellite phone only if it's life or death. Instructions taped beside it. Extra charges will apply. 4. Fires only in the fireplace or the fire pit out back. And 5. Do not leave the property after dark. If a deer follows you, go back inside. I laughed when I read the last one. I may not be a hunter, but I'm pretty sure deer don't stalk people. It seemed like the kind of local superstition you'd include to give the city folk a thrill. Like we'd all sit around the bonfire telling ghost stories about the demon deer of whatever county this is called. Beside the list were instructions for the camera monitors. The owner had set up wildlife cameras that fed into screens inside. It was a pretty cool idea, especially for someone like me who should definitely not be interacting with the local wildlife. I spent the afternoon unpacking and wiping down surfaces that felt tacky under my fingers. My medication lined up on the bathroom shelves looked bizarre, clinical orange plastic bottles against splintering wood shelves. The harsh bathroom light made the warnings on the labels jump out. May cause drowsiness. Do not mix with alcohol. May cause hallucinations in some patients. The first night was quiet. I sat outside by the fire pit with a blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. The darkness out here wasn't like in the city. It felt heavy, like something you could drown in. But the stars? There were so many, each one blinking awake as my eyes adjusted. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. My shoulders relaxed away from my ears, and I actually started to feel okay, like maybe this forced retreat wasn't so bad after all. I fell asleep on the couch, the dying embers casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. My dreams were filled with hoofbeats and whispers. The morning broke with birdsong that seemed too cheerful and too normal. I felt stupid for how tense I'd been the day before. The cabin groaned and popped as the morning sun warmed the old wood. I made coffee on the ancient stove, watching the steam curl against the window, while trying to remember if I'd taken my meds before bed. I decided to check out the trail by the lake. The path was well-worn, winding between pine trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. The air smelled of decomposing leaves and pine sap, with the occasional metallic undertone I couldn't quite place. Everything looked normal. Fallen logs, pine cones, glimpses of the lake through the trees. But the longer I walked, the more I felt watched. Not threatened exactly, but observed. I stopped several times, turning full circles. Nothing but trees and silence. A silence so complete it felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. As I continued, the trail curved around a massive boulder, and I found myself staring at a small clearing. In the center stood a crude arrangement of sticks, 3 branches forming a triangle with smaller twigs balanced across them. Not natural, but not exactly threatening either. Probably just a marker left by hikers, I muttered, my voice sounding flat and wrong in the dense air. I continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes following me all the way back to the cabin. By the time I reached the porch, my shirt was sticking to my back despite the cool weather. That evening, I sat by the fire pit again. The flames cast wild shadows across the yard as the darkness pressed in. Everything smelled more intense at night. The smoke, the pine, and something else. Something musky, like a wet dog and rotten eggs. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement in the woods. 2 points of light hovering low, eyes reflecting the firelight. Just a raccoon, I told myself, trying to stay calm. Or a fox. But the owner had mentioned bears too, hadn't he? And those eyes were pretty far off the ground for a raccoon. As the minutes ticked by, the weight of the stare grew heavier, almost physical. If that was a raccoon, it would be the size of a bear. If it was a bear, well, I wasn't going to risk having my first bear encounter be my last. I put out the fire as quickly as I could and walked back to the cabin, trying not to run. Whatever it was, it didn't let me out of its sight. I could feel its gaze burning into the back of my neck. I double-checked the locks, telling myself I was being ridiculous, but I also pushed a chair under the door handle just in case. By day 3, I was crawling out of my skin. No phone, no internet, no human contact. Just me and the squirrels, and the growing certainty that skipping my evening dose of meds was a bad idea. My thoughts kept circling back to all the things I'd come here to escape. The silence magnified every sound, every creak of the settling house, every whisper of the wind, and every scratch against the cabin's exterior. Was it branches? It had to be branches. I caught myself talking out loud just to hear a human voice. "This place is getting to you, Alex," I said to the empty room. Sometimes I swear I heard my own voice coming back to me from outside, just a split second later, like a mocking echo. "Oh man, I really am going crazy," I chuckled, but the sound fell flat. I decided to watch the only TV available, Nature's Live Show. I pulled a chair up to the monitors for the outside cameras and flipped through the feeds. Driveway, fire pit, and 2 facing the woods. Everything was in the eerie night vision green, but at least I could see what was out there. Right now the live show was boring. No wildlife to watch. I left the monitors on while making dinner. The steady rhythm of my knife against the cutting board was almost soothing. And then a faint beep from the monitors. Motion detected. That's when I saw it. A deer at the edge of the woods. Its form looked ghostly in the night vision. At first I was excited. "Looks like someone's joined me for dinner," I said, watching the deer with its head down munching away. But something was off. It wasn't eating grass. It was hunched over something that was moving. My brain took way too long to process what my eyes were seeing. The deer had pinned something down with its front hooves. A rabbit. And it was eating it, ripping it apart with its teeth. My knife clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. "Deer are herbivores, right?" I said, my voice higher than normal. "They don't eat meat. Or do they? God, I wish I could Google this. Maybe this was normal behavior that they just left out of Bambi." "Oh my God. You're 3 days in and you're already freaking yourself out," I muttered. But I couldn't look away from the monitor. The deer froze mid-motion. Slowly it started to raise its head from its kill and look directly at the camera. Its eyes didn't reflect the infrared light like they should. Instead, they almost absorbed it, like 2 black holes in its head. My skin prickled with goosebumps. It took a step towards the camera, and then another. Each of its movements were stuttering and wrong, like it was wobbling around trying to stay standing up. "Jesus, does this thing have some kind of disease?" it whispered. And then the feed cut out. "What the fuck did I just watch?" I said to the empty room. I tried to laugh it off. This had to be normal nature stuff I just had never seen before. Regular deer behavior that city people don't know about. And yet my heart wouldn't stop racing, and a sense of fear wouldn't leave my mind. That night sleep was impossible. Every sound outside became amplified in my head. The wind in the trees sounded like whispers. The occasional splash from the lake seemed deliberate, like something large was entering the water. Around 3 a.m. I gave up and tried to distract myself with solitaire. I was midway through my second game when I heard it. The soft thud of something walking around the cabin's perimeter. Not random animal movement, but methodical, purposeful. I went to the monitors and flipped through the feeds until I found the source. The deer was back, pacing around the cabin in that jerky, unnatural gait. As I watched, it stopped and turned towards the front of the cabin, directly towards the camera, towards me. Those hollow eyes seemed to look right through the walls, right through the screen, directly into me. My mouth went dry. The air in the cabin suddenly felt cold and thin, like I was at high altitude. I could smell something rotten seeping in from outside, like wet fur and spoiled meat. What happened next made me question whether I was awake or trapped in some horrible nightmare. The deer began to rise onto its hind legs, not like a deer rearing up, but like a human standing. Its spine elongated with a series of wet cracking sounds that I swear I could hear through the walls. Its shoulders widened, stretching the skin until I could see dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Its front legs hung at its sides, and fingers, not hooves, were unfurling from what had been delicate forelegs. The head remained a deer's head, but wrong. The jaw hinged open far wider than what should have been possible, revealing canines and rows of sharp teeth. And those eyes, those bottomless black holes, remained fixed on the camera, fixed on me. I froze. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My brain was scrambling for explanations. I was dreaming. I was hallucinating. My medications had side effects. The isolation was getting to me, hey, I'd forgotten my evening dose 2 nights in a row. That had to be it. The creature opened its mouth wider, impossibly wide. The sound that came out wasn't animal or human. It was a high, thin wail that made me cover my ears and my head hurt. I jumped back as the deer suddenly turned and ran off screen. "What the fuck was that?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. And then I heard it, footsteps on the front porch. Not the soft padding of an animal, but the the deliberate steps of something heavy. Hooves, and then claws scraping against the outside wall. The wood groaned in protest. The smell grew stronger, decay and copper and something else. It's not real, I whispered to myself. This is not real. It's the meds or the lack of meds. There's no way this is real. I grabbed the satellite phone, fumbling with the power button. It was dead. I followed the instructions taped beside it, but nothing, not even a flicker. Something tapped on the window. 3 distinct taps, like knuckles against the glass. My stomach twisted itself into knots. And then I heard a voice outside the cabin. "Help me, please help me." It was my voice, but I hadn't spoken. "I'm hurt, please, I need help." My voice again, but twisted. It was off, like a recording being played at the wrong speed. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over the chair. The hallway seemed longer than before, the bedroom door further away. I had to get out. I had to get to my car. I grabbed my keys and my jacket. I threw open the front door without looking through the peephole. The porch was empty. It was only 20 feet to the car. I could make it. I sprinted across the gravel, my footsteps sounding like gunshots in the silence. The car was there, but something was wrong. The tires were slashed. Not cut, but torn, like something had ripped through the rubber with its teeth. Just then, something moved behind the car. A shadow detached itself from the darkness and came into view. It was not fully deer anymore. It was not fully anything I recognized. I turned and ran back towards the cabin, my only shelter against this nightmare. I could hear it behind me. It sounded like a dozen legs moving at once, like bones scraping against each other. I barely made it back inside, locking the door behind me. I pushed furniture against it. I barricaded myself in. For the rest of the night, it tried to get me to let it in. It mimicked my therapist. "Alex, you need to face your fears. Open the door. This is just avoidance behavior." It mimicked my mother. "Honey, please let me in. I drove all this way to check on you. Are you even taking your pills?" It mimicked me. "This isn't real. It's just another panic attack. Let me in so I can help you breathe. Remember what Dr. Levinson taught us?" It scratched the windows and knocked on the walls, begged to be let in. Sometimes it sounded like it was inside the room with me, whispering directly into my ear, its breath hot and rancid. I curled in the corner, my hands over my ears, my eyes squeezed shut. The medication I brought was in the bathroom. It was too far away. "This isn't real," I kept telling myself. "This is a delusion. This is why you need help. You're not taking your meds properly." But delusions don't scrape paint from the doors, and they don't leave gouges in the wood. Or do they? The sun eventually rose, and everything was quiet. Birdsong returned as if nothing had happened. The satellite phone worked just like that, full power. I called the sheriff, my voice shaking as I told him everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "I'll be out there in an hour," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. While waiting, I paced the cabin. In the daylight, everything looked so normal, except for the deep gouges in the front door, the scratched window glass, and the strange tracks in the mud outside. Had I done those things myself? Had my mind fully fractured completely? When the sheriff's truck pulled up, I almost collapsed with relief. He was tall and weathered, with a face that had seen too much sun and not enough smiling. He listened patiently as I rambled through my story again, his expression unreadable. "Show me," was all he said when I finished. I led him around the cabin, pointing out the damage, the claw marks on the door, the scratches in the windows. He nodded, taking pictures with his phone. "And there's tracks," I said, leading him to the side of the cabin where I'd seen the footprints in the mud. They were still there, hoof prints that morphed into barefoot human prints, that morphed into something else. The sheriff knelt down, studying them carefully. His face gave nothing away. "What do you think made these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first, just stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. And then he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "How long have you been out here alone?" he asked. 3 days. "And you're from the city?" It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Have you taken any drugs, or are you on any medication?" I hesitated. "Yes, meds for anxiety and other things." "Have you been taking them regularly?" I looked away. I might have missed a dose or two. He nodded, unsurprised. "You say this thing looked like a deer at first?" "Yes, but then it stood up. It walked on 2 legs, and it talked to you," he finished. "In voices you recognized?" I felt embarrassed. "Do you believe me?" He sighed, looking outward towards the tree line. My stomach dropped. "You think I imagined it? That I did all this damage myself?" He shrugged. "I think you should get back to the city, back to your doctor, and get your medication sorted out." "But the tracks?" "The tracks could be anything. Deer tracks overlapping with human prints, and then your mind is filling in the rest." But his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he said it. "Have you ever seen this before, with anybody else who stayed here?" The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "Go home, take your meds, stay around other people, and don't come back here." back in my apartment surrounded by city noise, light pollution, and the comforting proximity of other humans. I tried to convince myself that it had all been some kind of breakdown. The isolation, the stress, my history of anxiety, the missed medication, it was all a perfect storm. But sometimes when I look in the mirrors, I see something standing behind me, but when I turn, there's nothing there. Last night I found muddy marks on my balcony. They could have been hoof prints, but they could have been anything. Dr. Levinson says I'm making connections that aren't there, that I'm still processing trauma. But now I hear it at night, outside my apartment window, 17 stories up. Tap, tap, tap. And my own voice. Alex, this isn't real. This is just another one of your panic attacks. I can make it all go away. Just let me in. People always ask if the hotel is haunted. I usually just smile and say, these old buildings, they tend to hold on to things. That usually shuts them up. I've been giving that same answer since before the lobby was renovated in '87. Most of the weird stuff happens on the 3rd floor. Phones ringing with no one on the other end, water running in empty rooms, and the occasional scream muffled by the walls. I keep a key behind the desk labeled 307, do not rent. Still, management keeps that room listed online, so it books itself sometimes. Last week, a woman checked in with her teenage daughter, said they were just passing through. Her bell-bottoms and feathered hair reminded me of guests from decades ago, though nobody dresses that way anymore. At 2:13 a.m., the mother came down in her robe, clutching her phone like a weapon. Someone was in our room, she screamed, not very happy. My daughter saw a man standing at the foot of her bed wearing an old uniform. I asked which room they were in. She said, 307. Of course she said 307. I offered to move them downstairs. She nodded, eyes wide, and said, there's something wrong with this place. I gave her my usual line. These old buildings, they tend to hold on to things. She didn't laugh. Most people don't. You start to notice patterns working nights here. The same complaints, the same cold spots, the same figures in the hallway mirrors that aren't there when you turn around. Sometimes guests try to talk to me for hours. Lonely truckers, college kids on ghost hunts, and once a man offered me $100 just to sit in the lobby with him until sunrise. Said he didn't feel safe in his room. I agreed but never took the money. What was I going to spend it on anyway? Yesterday a new girl came in for the morning shift. She looked around, confused. I didn't think anyone would be here. They told me the night manager died in '98, was murdered in one of the hotel rooms by an angry guest, and they never replaced him. I smiled and shrugged. Yet, here I am. Let me show you the ropes. I watched as she examined the logbook, the phone that hardly ever rings, and the security cameras. Sometimes the 3rd floor feed cuts out, I told her. It's been doing that since they installed the system back in 2001. She nodded, staring at the monitors, and then paused. Wait, is this live? She pointed to the screen showing the lobby chairs, the coffee station, and the front desk. Yep, sure is. She tilted her head. But I thought... Her voice started to trail. I turned to her slowly. She was backing away now, eyes flicking between me and the monitor showing only her behind the desk. My gaze drifted to the key for 307 still hanging on its hook, the room where they found me. I just smiled. These old buildings, they tend to hold on to things. I've been running for hours. My legs are jelly and my lungs are on fire, but I can't stop. I've always hated clowns. Ever since my 5th birthday when my well-meaning parents hired one who followed me around the yard making balloon animals while I screamed. 25 years later, that fear has never faded. My ex used to tease me about it. For a wilderness photographer who's faced down grizzlies, you sure lose it over a little face paint. Now I'm 40 miles from my car in the Montana backcountry, completely alone and being stalked by one. I'm 4 days into what was supposed to be a peaceful solo trek through the wilderness. A chance to clear my head after the divorce papers came through last month. My ex got the house in Missoula, most of our friends, and even my darkroom equipment. All I kept was my camera gear, my dad's compass, and enough self-doubt to fill the valleys between these mountains. The first day on the trail had been therapeutic. The September air was crisp, aspens turning gold against the evergreens. I had got some stunning shots of a bull elk silhouetted against the morning mist. I breathed easier out here, away from the sympathetic or accusing glances of friends who had chosen sides. It was going fine until the second night. I woke up around 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the stream nearby, soft water over rocks and wind through the pines, the usual symphony of the wilderness at night. The quarter moon cast blue shadows through the mesh of my tent. But then I heard it, off in the distance. It was music. Circus music. A calliope playing a tune that seemed to twist through the trees like something alive. The notes hung in the air, discordant and warped as if being played on instruments slowly breaking apart. It's not the wildlife, and it can't be the radio. I'm miles from cell service and haven't seen a soul since the ranger at the trailhead 3 days ago. It's a tall, lanky man with unnaturally perfect posture and a smile that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. You know, people go missing in these woods, he said, checking my permit with hands that seemed too large for his wrists. His name tag read R. Grinwell, but was slightly crooked, as if it had been hastily pinned on. Every year, search and rescue finds abandoned campsites and no signs of the campers. He leaned in close. Don't make me come hunt you down, he said with a wide, forced smile. His teeth were perfect, too perfect, like they'd been painted on. I laughed it off. Rangers are always trying to scare solo hikers into being cautious, and I've been backpacking in these mountains since I was a teenager. But now, lying in my sleeping bag as that music drifted through the darkness, his words returned with new meaning. I laid there in my tent, frozen, listening. The air grew dense, pressing against my skin like I was underwater. Eventually the music faded, but the heaviness remained. In the morning, the rising sun almost convinced me it was a dream, some bizarre auditory hallucination brought on by altitude and solitude. I packed up camp, made coffee on my little stove, and tried to shake off the unease that was clinging to me like the morning dew. Until I saw the balloon. It was tied to the pine tree beside my gear, bright red and gently bobbing in the breeze. The nylon string was knotted into a perfect bow against the rough bark. I told myself it was a prank, some backpacker with a dark sense of humor. It had to be something rational. But I hadn't passed anyone else on the trail yesterday, and these remote eastern paths rarely ever saw traffic this late in the season. And when I studied the ground next to my tent, the only footprints I found were my own. No other boot marks, no broken twigs, and no sign anyone had approached in the night. I remembered my camera. I could document this. I reached for my Canon, but when I tried to turn it on, the LCD display showed nothing. I removed the battery and replaced it, but nothing. Something made me check my compass, the reliable one that I'd had since Dad gave it to me for my first solo hike. The silver case was cool against my palm as I flipped it open. The needle was spinning, slowly at first, and then faster, whirling around like a carnival ride. I shook it and tapped it. Nothing stopped the endless rotation. I tried to forget about it and just kept hiking, following the trail markers instead. The day grew warmer, the sunlight streaming through the pine branches onto the needle-covered path. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No squirrels chattering, no birds calling, just the sound of my boots on the soil and my increasing rapid breathing. About an hour in, I stopped to rest beneath a massive Douglas fir. I felt a shift in the air, a cooling that didn't match the sunlit day. And then I heard something moving off trail. Not the crackling of footsteps of an animal, but a soft gliding sound, like silk brushing against leaves. I turned and glimpsed a flash of vibrant color between the distant trees, a splash of red and yellow against the forest green, and then nothing. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin. "Is someone there?" No answer, just unnatural silence. I quickened my pace, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. The trail climbed steeply, switching back up the ridge towards an overlook I'd planned to photograph. My lungs burned from the exertion and anxiety. At the top I found another balloon, blue this time, tied to a gnarled juniper that clung to the rocky outcropping. Beyond it, the valley stretched for miles, a rumpled green blanket dotted with beautiful little lakes. Any other time I'd be setting up my tripod, adjusting my polarizing filter. Now I just stared at the balloon, bobbing cheerfully in the mountain breeze. I pulled out my water bottle, trying to calm my racing heart. As I drank, movement caught my eye. A figure on the trail far below, a splash of bright colors. I fumbled for my binoculars. It was a clown, tall with a white face and a grotesque red smile, standing motionless on the path I'd just climbed. He just stood there, watching me. The forest seemed to bend around him, branches leaning away as if being repelled. Even through the binoculars, I couldn't make out his eyes clearly, just dark hollows in that white face. And then he tilted his head, slow and bird-like he was watching something he couldn't quite understand. One white-gloved hand raised in a cheerful wave. Every part of me screamed to run, so I did, off the trail, through the trees, down the other side of the ridge, where my map showed another path that would eventually loop back up to the trailhead. I crashed through the underbrush and slid down the slopes, jumped across a narrow stream, my pack caught on the branches. My arms were becoming scratched and bloody, but I didn't slow down. Hours later, exhausted and disoriented, I checked my compass again. Still spinning, the needle a silver blur inside the glass. My phone had no signal, and the GPS app showed only a blank screen. The sun had started to lower, lengthening the shadows across the forest floor. I was lost. That night I'd made camp beneath a granite overhang. I didn't even bother with the fire. Too exhausted, too scared of drawing any attention. My mind kept replaying the same questions. What does it want? Why is it here? Why me? I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, used my pack as a pillow, and fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of spinning compass needles and bloody smiles. I was woken by the music again, closer now, and something else. Breathing, slow breathing just outside my makeshift shelter. No footsteps or movement, just the sound of something sniffing the air. For hours, the air grew thick with a scent I couldn't identify, sweet but rotten, like fruit left out too long in the summer heat. I laid still, barely breathing, clutching my useless compass like a talisman. The stone at my back was cold, but sweat soaked through my clothes. As soon as the morning light hit the trees, I ran. I didn't even grab my pack. I left everything except the clothes on my back, my water bottle, and this useless spinning compass clutched in my fist. I have been running ever since. The forest has become a blur of green and brown. I scraped my face on low branches, twisted my ankle in a hidden hole, but I kept moving. The pain doesn't matter. Nothing matters except distance. I finally stopped at a creek to drink and catch my breath. There's no way he followed me this far. No way. I checked my compass again. It had finally stopped spinning. Now the needle was pointing directly behind me. A chill ran through me. Slowly I turned, looking over my shoulder. A branch snapped, and I spun around, gripping the compass so hard the glass cracked. But there was nothing there, just trees and shadows and silence. I bent over the stream and splashed cold water on my face. The cold shocked me back to clarity for a moment. This couldn't be happening. I've been a rational person my whole life. There had to be some explanation. I'm exhausted, I'm dehydrated. Maybe it was grief over the divorce manifesting in some bizarre way. As the ripples in the water started to still, I caught a reflection, not my own. A white face with a red smile standing behind me. But in the water, the smile wasn't smiling anymore. The painted curves had dripped and run, revealing what lay beneath, something that had only ever resembled a human face. And I realized the eyes weren't eyes at all, just gaping dark holes that seemed to swallow the light. My stomach dropped when I noticed the slightly crooked name tag. R. Grinwell. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just watched as his reflection raised one gloved finger to his lips. Shh. And then it spoke, in a voice I recognized from days ago. I said, "Don't make me come hunt you down." I was up late again with another tight deadline, another night of coffee and the quiet hum of this tired house. My eyes had been playing tricks on me all night, letters bleeding into wrong places, shadows shifting where they shouldn't, the kind of exhaustion that makes reality soft around the edges. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. It's the kind of habit you develop when sleep becomes optional. It was past 1 a.m. when I heard the soft shuffle of bare feet in the hallway. Slow, hesitant steps. Jacob appeared in my office doorway like a pale ghost, clutching his blanket against his chest. "Mommy," his voice was barely a whisper, "there's something under my bed." I looked up from my screen, offering the tired smile parents perfect over the years of night terrors and imaginary monsters. "Another bad dream, sweetie?" He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just stood there with those wide eyes that looked red from either lack of sleep or crying. Something about his stillness made me pause. I sighed and followed him back to his room. The hallway stretched longer than usual, a trick of the night, I figured. His door creaked as I opened it. His room was quiet. The shadows were clinging to the corners like spiderwebs. "Hop in bed, kiddo," I said with a smile. I pulled his blankets up, brushed his hair back, and kissed his forehead. It was cold, really cold. "Are you feeling all right?" I said softly as I gently ran the back of my hand from his forehead to his cheek. He didn't answer, just stared straight up at the ceiling. The wrongness settled in my chest, but I pushed it down. He must be exhausted. "Okay, sweetie, let me check under the bed," I said, kneeling beside the mattress. I lifted the edge of the blanket and peered underneath. That's when I saw him. Jacob. He was curled against the far wall, trembling and pale. His eyes found mine in the darkness, wide with terror. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice raw from crying. "There's someone in my bed." It's Friday night. I'm numb and speechless. There's no rest or peace. It's bleak and sleepless. So I'm catching up on texts and emails I left unopened long before. Without sleep, my eyes were aching, when suddenly there came a shaking, like a knock, softly breaking through my apartment door. "It's just the wind," I whispered lowly, tapping at my apartment door. Only that, and nothing more. I still recall it was December, the coldest month I can remember, every flicker from the screen casting ghostly shadows on the floor. Desperate for the dawn of morning, numb from grief and endless mourning, grief for her whose name I'm scorning. I won't say it any more. And the hush, so strange, so hollow, crept into places fear could follow, whispering through heavy curtains, pulsing through my chest's dark core. So to steady my breath from shaking, and to stop my tired heart from breaking, I muttered lies of my own making. It's just the wind outside, I'm sure. Maybe it's a visitor, someone lost and confused and knocking at my door. Maybe it's just a glitch and nothing more. Through my anxiety intensely spiraling, I spoke with shaky courage rising. "Sorry," I said. "I must have dozed and didn't hear you. Your knock was softer than before." That's a lie. The truth is I was scrolling, reading comments full of trolling, letting all that mindless drolling drown out knocks I might ignore. I usually don't have guests unexpected. You probably should have called or texted. Wait, there's a camera mounted just above my apartment door. I pulled up the feed, but saw only darkness there, and nothing more. As I stood there straining viewing, I saw a heavy shadow moving, and dreams of things I'd locked away came leaking through my bedroom door. Though the silence had no meaning, but still I swear I heard my own voice repeating the name I typed but kept deleting, softly whispering, "Lenore." My own voice echoing the name I swore that I wouldn't speak of any more. Only that, and nothing more. I closed the app, my pulse was reeling, my heart and mind too raw for healing, when again I heard that tapping, harder now than it was before. Surely, I gasped, this is madness. It's just my guilt and creeping sadness, from the moment that my rage took hold and turned from red to blackness, still hours fresh and bleeding sore. Wait a minute. If I can see outside my open window, maybe I can peer down into the blackness and catch a glimpse to stop this madness, to prove this is no person knocking at my door. It's just a draft and nothing more. As I threw back the window curtain, my hands were shaking, and I felt my mind and senses breaking, when through the open window flew that heavy shadow from before. I panicked, but this was no monster from my imagination. It was just a bird with grim fixation. A raven. Without a glance or hesitation, and with quiet domination, it perched itself on the bust of some dead goddess I ordered online to spruce up my decor. It just perched and stared, and nothing more. Then this bird of dark dimension stirred my soul with apprehension, though its gaze was still and lifeless, like a mask from ancient lore. What is this? I asked a question carefully measured. You look ruffled, winged, and weathered, but I heard you speak, so I know you're more than feathered. What's your name? I instantly regretted the desire to know more. The raven's stare was cold and hollow, but the worst was yet to follow, because when it spoke, the word it chose, it shook me to my inner core. The raven quoted, "Nevermore." I was stunned to hear it speaking, frozen stiff, my body weakening. Though the word meant less than nothing, it cracked the mask I wore before. This can't be real. Birds don't speak. But as my panic spiral deepened, another thought began to creep in. Maybe if I record and posted, they would pity me for sure. They would cry for me and for Lenore. Maybe they would think she left me and not suspect the truth that pressed me, not hear the silence screaming through this blood-stained corridor. But in the chaos of its landing, I moved from where I once was standing, and my phone it must have fallen and is lost inside a shadow somewhere on this darkened floor. Without proof, who would believe there was a talking raven perched atop my living room decor? Especially one named Nevermore. But the raven, still unblinking, seemed to know what I was thinking, as if he stared straight through me to the blood upon the floor. I tried to shake the sick suspicion. I called it grief or deep contrition, but the guilt hung close, a heavy vision that I couldn't look away from anymore. I couldn't scrub the way her pleading echoed off these very walls, only hours just before she stilled and spoke no more. The air grew thick, the lights grew colder, and voices whispered from the corner, saying things I dare not utter, speaking of the crime I had committed in the hours just before. I closed my eyes but saw her clearer. It was Lenore's face, but drawing nearer, her body pale and broken in the mirror, floating just above the floor. Arms outstretched, her mouth still bleeding, reaching through my bedroom door, reaching for me to settle the score. "I'm sorry," I croaked, but she was fading. The raven's gaze felt harsh and grating, scratching at my crumbling patience, dragging horrors through the floor. "It was an accident," I lied, as my trembling voice denied the truth that the sleepless night had carved into my core. It was no accident, no slip, no saving, that caused the silence behind the door. Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." I sank into the leather seating, my heart and mind both fiercely beating, staring at that damn dark creature perched atop my room decor. I whispered low, She's not returning. These dreams, this dread, this useless burning, it's not madness, it's discerning. What I can hide from you no more. The raven shifted, its eyes demanding, and it muttered back in understanding, the name that I had tattooed upon me to prove how much I loved her only weeks before. My love, my world, my sweet Lenore. The smell of iron, thick and seeping, filled the room where she lay sleeping, where once I thought she'd never leave me, where I thought our love would soon restore. But anger flared, and hands once mild twisted into something wild, and through my rage a fate defiled. Now the ghost of Lenore lingers over the stain upon the floor, watching and waiting, a memory, and something more. Demon! I screamed at the black cold specter. Tell me I'm no wretched defector! Tell me this is just the sorrow of a heart that's bruised and sore! But the raven, cold and dying, answered not my desperate crying, just the shadow of her voice, still lying trapped behind my bedroom door, just the echo of a choice I cannot take back anymore. The raven quoted, "For Lenore." You don't know, I croaked in pleading, but the room itself was bleeding. The walls ran red with the silence I had murdered just before. It was anger, I kept crying. It was panic, not deciding. I just wanted peace, not dying. I didn't mean to lock that door. But the raven brought a message. Dear sir, there is no need for your confession. I care not what excuses you managed to explore. You see, your crime was so horrific that your punishment is so specific. No prison cell will keep you from what you did behind that door. The panic in me started rising. My own fate I'm realizing. This bird was speaking of the justice being sought for sweet Lenore. And suddenly there came a shaking, like the very walls were breaking, a pounding loud, relentless, at my trembling apartment door. It's not the wind, I whispered lowly, as the giant reaper slowly came to claim me for my crimes against my love. Lenore. And the raven? Well, the raven sat there smiling, his dark figure so beguiling, perched atop the dead-eyed goddess I had ordered for decor. Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." I've never understood why people think cemeteries are peaceful. These aren't places of rest where the dead sleep undisturbed, or where marble angels stand eternally watching over ordered rows of stone. Not in Shadowwood, anyway. Nothing rests easy here. The locals avoid this place. They take the long way around, even in the middle of the day. I can't say that I blame them. The forest has grown in too close over the years, its branches reaching over crumbled headstones like gnarled fingers, moss crawling across the weathered names that no one remembers. Most mornings, the fog clings to the ground, as if the earth itself is breathing out cold sighs of relief to have made it through the night. Today that fog is rolling right through me as I stand by the eastern gate, a sensation like cold water passing through my chest. I've never gotten used to it, even after all these years. You're probably wondering why I'm here. Well, I live here, and I work here. My job? Well, my job is to keep stupid people from doing dumb shit. Teenagers, thrill seekers, and ghost hunters. They all come here because they hear stories of how haunted this place is. And now with social media, people will come here and risk their lives for the potential of 10 seconds of viral fame. Shadowwood Cemetery is over 200 years old, and it was still in use until it was abandoned half a century ago. It sits in a small clearing about 2 miles from town, and has since been swallowed up by the surrounding trees. There's no path to get here, and you won't find it on any map, but that doesn't stop people from coming, and sometimes, from dying. I'm the caretaker. At least that's what I tell the few people who ask. Jamie, the odd one who tends to the forgotten cemetery deep in the woods. The one who discourages visitors. The one who seems to appear from nowhere when you cross the rusty gates. It's kind of flattering to know that I've become part of the local lore. It's fall now. I don't feel the autumn chill anymore. But I do remember what cold feels like, which is why I still wear my heavy coat. It's a habit, I guess, from a previous life. October 5th. Most nights I walk the perimeter. I check the locks and make sure the chains on the mausoleum are secure. I know every cracked pathway, every leaning stone, and every hollow where the ground has settled over a century of decay. The ravens know me too. They watch me from the twisted oak by the eastern wall, silent witnesses to my daily routine. The fall is always the worst time. The dying leaves and dark, chilling nights tend to bring out all the thrill seekers and seasonal paranormal enthusiasts. This October night, I can feel something different in the air. There's something waiting. There were some reporters out here doing a news story on the history of this place, gearing up for Halloween, which is only going to make things worse. More people are going to want to come out here for a scare. Something in the distance caught my attention. I hear them before I see them, whispers and laughter cutting through the stillness, flashlight beams dancing between the trees. "Bro, this place is perfect for the channel," a young man's voice trying to sound braver than he feels. "Ghost hunting at Shadowwood Cemetery? We'll get so many views." There's 4 of them, college kids I'm guessing, 2 boys and 2 girls. They have expensive camera equipment and are passing around a bottle of something. As I quietly step out from behind the Delancey family crypt, I raise my hands up and stand in the middle of the path, trying to give the illusion of blocking their way. "Sorry guys, the cemetery's closed." I must have startled them. The tallest one nearly dropped his camera. "Jesus, man, where did you come from?" "You need to leave." I kept my voice flat and calm. "It's not safe here after dark." The girl with blue hair laughed, emboldened by whatever was in that bottle. "What are you going to do, call the cops? This place has been abandoned for like 50 years. "Not abandoned, just forgotten, and you really don't want to be here tonight." The second guy, the quiet one in the back, shivers despite himself. I can tell that he feels it. Some people just do, the wrongness of this place. "What's in there?" Blue hair points to the mausoleum that stands at the center of the cemetery. It's larger than the rest, and much older, the stone darkened with age, and the door secured with heavy chains. "I've heard that's where they put the sheriff," she continued. "There's nothing in there that concerns you." I step forward, my voice dropping to a growl. Though I can't physically stop them, I've learned that my presence alone can be powerful. I position myself between them and the mausoleum. "Go home. There are plenty of other places to make your videos." The tall one tried to step around me. "Come on, we just want to take a look." "No!" Something in my voice stopped him cold. "That's Sheriff Silas Greaves in there, and trust me when I say you don't want to wake him up." The quiet boy tugged at his friend's sleeve. "Let's go, Jake. That guy's crazy, and this place feels wrong." Blue hair rolls her eyes, but I can see the doubt creeping in. "Whatever, we'll just come back tomorrow during the day." "Do that, and I'll be here." I stood firm and watched them retreat, grumbling back through the gates, their flashlights fading into the darkness of the surrounding woods. As I inhale slowly, tasting the damp night air, I realize that was close. Too close. And they'll be back. They always come back. All of the curious thrill seekers who don't believe the stories. Each year they get bolder, with their new equipment and their live streams, and their need to provoke something beyond their understanding. I check the chains on the mausoleum door again. They're holding firm, for now. But it's only October 5th. The closer we get to Halloween, the worse it gets. It may not seem like such a big deal. Just keep them away, keep the chains secure, and keep that old sheriff locked inside his tomb until dawn. And just hope and pray that that's enough. As I take a seat on the worn stone bench and watch the moon climb higher in the sky, I exhale a breath that feels like I've been holding since the sun went down. They don't know what lies in wait here every night in the Shadowwood. But I do. Sheriff Silas Graves wasn't just some local lawman buried with honor. The history books don't tell his true story. The townspeople made sure of that back when they sealed him away. Greaves ruled this area with cruelty in the 1770s, when Shadowwood was just a struggling timber town at the edge of the frontier. They say he'd hang a man for looking at him wrong. They say he took what he wanted: land, livestock, women. And they say his knuckles were always split from beating confessions out of the innocent. The town endured him for years until they couldn't take it anymore. A few men got together and decided they needed to end Sheriff Greaves' reign of terror. So they came up with a plan. One winter night they lured him to this place. Back then it was just a clearing in the woods. They told him they'd caught witches in the act, a group of local women meeting secretly in the woods and performing rituals. The sheriff came eagerly, ready for another execution. Instead, they overpowered him, but not before he managed to kill one of the young men who'd come to take him down, the son of Curtis Coolidge, a well-known and well-respected man in town, and the man that would go on to replace Greaves as the sheriff. They dragged Sheriff Greaves to a stone chamber they'd prepared and sealed him in alive, with only a small opening to prolong his suffering. They buried the body of Coolidge's son in the ground right outside the stone mausoleum, right in front of that small opening, so it would be the last thing Greaves ever saw. They said now he could spend the rest of his time by himself, unable to unleash his cruelness outside of his tomb. For days they could hear him screaming, cursing them and promising vengeance. Until finally, silence. As the years went on, they built the cemetery around his tomb, a prison disguised as a mausoleum. Each new grave was a weight to hold him down, each death a reminder of his failed duty to protect. They thought they had sealed him away for good, but someone that evil, there's no way he could stay dead forever. They didn't understand what they had created. With every new body laid in this ground, with every grief-stricken tear that soaked this soil, he grew stronger. The dead fed him somehow. Their passage from this world to the next created something that he could use. Soon after his death, the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a tapping from the inside of the sealed mausoleum, and then eventually it got louder and more insistent. People would swear they could hear old Sheriff Greaves inside that mausoleum trying to get out. The town elders added chains in 1875, blessed by 7 preachers from 7 churches. It helped, but only for a while. But as the time passed and he grew stronger, they had to learn the rules of how to keep him dormant. But there did seem to be some limitations to his reach. He remained quiet until provoked. Knocking on his door will wake him. He can only emerge between midnight and dawn, and he grows stronger with every death. But as the years went on, everyone that had known about Sheriff Greaves had passed, and all that was left were the stories. And then one day it just seemed that the whole world had forgotten about this little Shadowwood cemetery, and moved on, leaving it completely abandoned. But he's still here, make no mistake. I've spent more nights than I can count in this place. I've seen the door rattle on moonless nights. I've heard what sounds like boots pacing inside, when no living thing should be there. I felt the air grow colder around the stone structure, and saw the frost form on the chains. The hardest part of my job isn't the solitude, or the cold, or the endless waiting. It's the failures. Every time I have to dig a fresh grave beneath the oak tree, I wonder again if this job is worth it. Year after year after year, it's the same cycle. Warning, failing, and burying. Sometimes decades pass without incident, and I almost convince myself the sheriff is weakening, and that perhaps someday I might finally be able to rest. But then another soul breaches the gates, and it begins again. What keeps me here? Maybe it's the knowledge that I'm the only one left who understands the true threat that lies within that mausoleum. It's been a pretty good run lately, though. Only 3 people have died since the cemetery was officially abandoned and forgotten 50 years ago. Each one of them leaving me with the grim task of burying them in unmarked graves far from the main paths. The first was a historian, came asking questions about the founding families, picked the lock on the mausoleum. I found pieces of him scattered throughout the forest. The official report called it an animal attack. The second was a pair of teenagers who snuck into the mausoleum on a dare. They left the gate open behind them. Only one of the bodies was recovered, the girl's. They never found the boy. The third happened just last summer. It was a live streamer, with 20,000 followers watching as he approached the mausoleum. Knocking on death's door is what he called the segment. The feed cut out just after midnight. I found what was left of him at dawn, arranged in a tableau that still haunts me. His eyes were missing. His camera was intact, but the memory card was destroyed. I buried him beneath the old oak, unmarked, just like the others, and added another stone to my burden. Tonight feels different, though. The air has a charge to it, like before a lightning strike. The ravens haven't left their perch in the oak tree, even though it's well past time for them to roost. Something is changing at Shadowwood Cemetery. I think Sheriff Greaves is waking up. October 15th. The group of college kids came back, just as they'd promised, and this time they brought friends. I chased them off again, but not before they filmed the exterior of the mausoleum for their channel. 50,000 views already, comments asking for more, daring them to go inside. I checked the chains and the lock just to make sure. Last night I heard knocking from inside, not the usual restless shifting, but deliberate. 3 slow knocks, and then silence, and then 3 more. He knew they were coming. He was preparing. After the kids had finally left, a memory flashed through my mind. Another Halloween, a group of teenagers with a crowbar, a sickening snap of the lock breaking. I remember the girl with the red coat who ran first. She almost made it to the gate. Almost. I remember how the sheriff moved. Not walking, but stuttering jerks like a film missing frames. How he reached her in seconds despite her head start. I remember the sound she made. Not a scream, something worse. I snap out of the memory, and feel terrible knowing that it can happen again, and I'm truly helpless to stop it. October 25th. I usually don't feel exhausted. I usually don't feel anything. But today I think I'm tired. Sometimes my hands pass through solid objects when I'm not concentrating. Little slips, signs of my fatigue. The blue-haired girl returned alone yesterday morning. I found her making charcoal rubbings of the weathered lettering on the mausoleum door. S. Greaves, 1732. Sealed, 1774. May God have mercy. What does sealed mean? She asked when I approached. No fear this time, just curiosity. It means he wasn't dead when they put him in there, I answered, surprising myself with the honesty. She studied my face. You talk about him like he's still alive. I didn't answer. I'm writing my thesis on forgotten historical sites, she continued. This place doesn't show up on any registry, but the stones date back to the 18th century. Why was it abandoned? I guess because it had served its original purpose, and over time, people just moved on. Well, most of them anyway. She laughed, but it faded quickly. You really believe it's haunted, don't you? "What's your name?" I asked instead of answering. "Ellie." She studied me for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. "You know, I've been researching Shadowwood for months. There are stories about this place going back generations. And there's always a caretaker mentioned, always someone warning people away." Something in her gaze made me uncomfortable, like she was seeing more than she should. "Some of the descriptions in the old journals," she hesitated, "they sound a lot like you." I frowned and looked away. People see what they want to see. "Or maybe some things don't change." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I found a photograph from 1925. There's a figure in the background, by the same oak tree. It's blurry, but—" "You should go," I said sharply. For the first time in decades I felt truly seen. It was both terrifying and strangely comforting. But I had to warn her. "Well, Ellie, some advice from the caretaker of a supposedly haunted cemetery. Don't come back on Halloween. Don't bring your friends. And never, ever knock on that door." She left without arguing. Something in my voice must have convinced her, at least temporarily. But I know the pull of this place, the way it whispers to the curious, the way it draws them back again and again, until the inevitable happens. I've tried everything over the years. Barriers, warnings, threats. Nothing works for long. And there's only so much I can do. The sheriff wants company, and somehow he finds a way to ensure he gets it. October 31st. The morning of October 31st dawns gray and cold, the kind of biting chill that sinks into your bones. Mist weaves itself between the headstones. The iron chains on the mausoleum door are coated with a thin layer of frost. Ugh, I hate Halloween. All day I wait, tense as a bowstring, but no one comes. By sunset I allow myself the faintest hope. Perhaps this year will be different. Perhaps the warnings took hold. That hope died at 11:42 p.m. Voices from the gate, flashlights and laughter. That sound too loud, it's too forced. I count 6 of them as they spill into the cemetery. Ellie with her blue hair, the boys from before. They're dressed for Halloween, cheap costumes half hidden under their jackets. They carry a bottle of whiskey, a Ouija board, and something worse, a small sledgehammer. I step into their path. "Hey now, I told you not to come back." The tall one, Jake, startles, and then recovers with a sneer. "Dude, it's Halloween. We've got every right to be here." "This isn't public property," I say, "and you're making a terrible mistake." "Relax," says the girl I haven't seen before. She's dressed as a witch, with a plastic cauldron serving as a makeshift purse. "We're just gonna do a little seance, film some content, and then be on our way. No harm done." Ellie won't meet my eyes. She knows better, but peer pressure is a powerful thing. "You need to leave," I say more forcefully. "Right now, before midnight," my tone getting a lot more forceful as the time inches closer. As Jake steps closer, I can smell the alcohol on his breath. "Or what, caretaker? You gonna call the Ghostbusters?" The quiet boy from before, I heard someone call him Thomas. He hangs back. "Guys, maybe this isn't such a good idea. This place does feel weird tonight." "It's a cemetery on Halloween, dumbass. It's supposed to feel weird." Jake laughs, but it's hollow. I took out my pocket watch. 11:53 p.m. "Last chance," I say quietly. "Walk out that gate and don't look back, before it's too late." For a moment I think Ellie will listen. She takes half a step backwards, and her eyes meet mine, and I see recognition there. Understanding, perhaps. Then Jake moves right past me, heading straight for the mausoleum at the center of the cemetery. "Come on, let's wake up this famous sheriff. I brought something that'll help with those chains." He holds up the sledgehammer, moonlight glinting off the metal head. Time slows as I lunge for him, but what am I going to do? Sometimes if I concentrate hard enough, I can almost feel solid for a moment, enough to create the illusion of blocking a path, of being more substantial than I am, but it never lasts long, and it drains me terribly, and right now I'm too weak for even that. I shout warnings that fade into the night air, and I watch in horror as Jake approaches the mausoleum, with sledgehammer raised. The first blow rings like a bell, sparks flying as metal strikes metal, but the chain holds. It's 11:58 p.m. The second blow finds a weak link. Something gives with a snap that echoes across the cemetery. The ravens in the oak tree take flight, a dark cloud against the moon. Ellie's voice suddenly afraid. "Jake, stop! Let's go!" 11:59 p.m. The third blow breaks the remaining chains. They fall away like dead snakes. Jake stands before the unlocked mausoleum door, breathing hard, a sledgehammer dangling from one hand. "No turning back now," he says with a bravado I can tell he doesn't feel. "Let's see what's got this caretaker so spooked." Midnight strikes as Jake raises his fist to the ancient door. 3 knocks, sharp and deliberate. "Sheriff Greaves," he calls, his voice cracking slightly. "Anyone home?" In that moment, everything fell silent. There was no wind, no distant cars, and no sounds of the night's creatures. And then, from inside the mausoleum, 3 knocks answer. Ellie screams and Thomas turns to run, and the others stand frozen in disbelief as the door creaks open, just an inch. "It's a trick," Jake whispers, but he's backing away now, sledgehammer forgotten on the ground. "It has to be a trick, some kind of joke." The door creaks open wider, but what emerges isn't the skeletal remains that they expected. First a hand, not decomposed, but wrong, the skin gray-white like river clay, the fingers too long, the joints bending in unnatural directions. Dirt-packed nails curved into talons. Then a shape fills the doorway, tall, impossibly tall, unfolding from a space that couldn't possibly contain it. A uniform once proud, now stained black with centuries of decay. The silver star on its chest catching the moonlight, reflecting it back distorted. And the face, God, that face. Not rotted away, but somehow preserved in a perpetual state of dying. Skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, lips pulled back in a permanent snarl, milky and vacant eyes that hadn't seen daylight in 2.5 centuries, yet somehow burning with recognition as they fixed on Jake. The sheriff's mouth opened, a black void that seemed to swallow the cemetery's dim light, and when he spoke, his voice was like gravel being crushed.
"You knocked."
I closed my eyes. I've seen what comes next, and I can't bear to watch it again. The screams tell me everything I need to know. By dawn, the cemetery is quiet again, and I walk amongst the headstones, collecting the scattered remains of Halloween costumes, a witch's hat, a plastic fang, and a camera with a shattered lens. The mausoleum door stands open, the chains lying broken on the ground. Inside, nothing but empty darkness. He's returned to his rest until next time. I gather what's left of them. It doesn't take long. The sheriff was thorough this time. I dig the graves myself as I always do, brand new unmarked mounds beneath the oak tree. As I work, I feel the weight of my failure, the guilt that never lessens, no matter how many years pass. I should have tried harder, done more, found a way to keep them out. The sun climbs higher, burning away the morning mist. In the harsh light, I look down at my hands on the shovel handle and notice how the sunlight passes right through them, transparent and ghostly. It happens sometimes when I'm tired, when the veil thins, and when I forget what I am. I'm so damn tired of this. I let out a sigh as I sit on the headstone that marks my grave under the twisted oak. The stone is so weathered now you can barely read my name. Jamie Coolidge, 1756 to 1774. I was 18 years old when my father told me the plan. None of us saw the revolver hidden under the sheriff's jacket. He only managed to get 1 shot off, but that's all it took. The bullet hit me square in the chest, and everything went black. I became the first grave in what would become Shadowwood Cemetery. They thought they were forcing Greaves to face the grave of the last person he killed, me. And here I've remained, the first victim, and now I'm bound to this place for eternity by some invisible tether. So now, I live in this haunted cemetery, and I only have one job to do. It all started with a graveyard and a shaky camera. I'll never forget the night we filmed the Blackwood Cemetery video. My hands were numb from the cold, my breath fogging the lens, while I whispered into the mic, "If there's anyone here, give us a sign." Behind me, Jenna rolled her eyes so hard I could practically hear it. She'd been against the whole spooky voice thing from the start. "Just talk normal, Alex," she said. "You sound like a terrible Halloween store employee." But hey, the bit worked. 3 days after we uploaded the video, The Blackwood Haunted Cemetery, it hit 1 million views, and then 5. The comments were flooding in. "That shadow at 8:43, WTF," and "fake but cool effects." And my personal favorite, "This guy's gonna get eaten by a ghost." I didn't sleep for 48 hours. I just kept refreshing the stats, watching the subscriber count climb. Sponsorship offers piled in my inbox. Energy drinks, VPNs, a company that sold ghost-repelling crystals. I should have quit while I was ahead. But quitting wasn't really my style, not after years of filming blurry orbs in my grandma's attic and editing reaction videos in my dorm room. This was my shot. My YouTube channel had been a joke to everyone except for me. My parents called it a phase. My ex called it embarrassing. But suddenly now everyone cared, even strangers. They wanted more. More scares, more proof, more of me standing in the dark, pretending I wasn't pissing myself every time a floorboard creaked. The problem is, the internet's a hungry beast. Give it a taste of blood, and it'll eat your whole arm off in seconds. "You're obsessed," Jenna said, squinting at me over her latte. We were crammed in our usual booth at the 24-hour diner, the one with the sticky tables and the waitress who always forgot my ketchup. Jenna had her camera dismantled in front of her, cleaning the sensor with a microfiber cloth like it owed her money. "You've watched that damn video 200 times. I paused the clip on my laptop, the exact frame where everyone said they saw a shadow figure dart behind a tombstone. Freeze, and then enhance. Right there. A smudge of pixels that could have been a person, or a tree, or even a trash bag, I guess. But the comments were convinced it was Casper's edgy cousin. It's research, I said. We need to figure out what made this one stick. Was it the lighting, the pacing, the weird EVP at the end? Or maybe, Marco chimed in, sliding into the booth with a plate of fries. People just love watching you hyperventilate over nothing. He tossed a fry at me. Marco was our sound guy, a human golden retriever with a podcast voice. Face it, dude, you're the star. Your oh crap face is pure cinema. Jenna snorted. He's not wrong. You give off the whole terrified toddler vibe. Thanks, I deadpanned. I'm glad my existential dread is entertaining. But they weren't wrong. The algorithm loved raw reactions. The comment section dissected every gasp, every flicker of doubt in my eyes. He's so scared, this has to be real. Ivy, our psychic medium consultant, slid into the booth last. She was chewing her thumbnail, staring at the shadow frame on my screen. You shouldn't have posted that, she muttered. I sighed. Not again. I'm serious, Alex. You don't know what you're messing with. That wasn't just a shadow, it was an invitation. Marco tossed a fry at her. Relax, Miss Cleo, it's a graveyard. Dead people are kind of the whole deal. Ivy didn't laugh. She never did. She joined the crew 6 months ago after sliding into my DMs with a rambling message about negative attachments and spiritual crossroads. I'd hired her because, well, she looked the part. All black lace and stormy eyebrows, and the fans ate it up. But half the time, I was pretty sure she was just making shit up. Look, I said, slamming my hands on the table harder than I meant to. This is how it works. The cemetery video went viral, and now we need to go bigger and scarier to keep riding this wave. I'm talking a locus of paranormal activity, somewhere with a history so dark even the skeptics will shit their pants. Jenna raised an eyebrow. Bigger than a haunted cemetery? I grinned, spinning my laptop around for them to see. Meet Hollowbrook Asylum. I'd found the name buried in a Reddit thread titled Places That Will Literally Kill You. It was built in 1903 and shut down in the 70s after a fire. A lot of people died, though the official count keeps changing depending on where you looked. We would definitely have to do better research to get the whole story. Every urban explorer so far who had tried to film there had either noped out or, well, their channels went dark. It's perfect. Absolutely not, Ivy said, her face pale. Come on, I said, it's gold. The second we announce it, the hype will go nuclear. You don't understand. That place isn't just haunted, it's alive. Marco grinned. That's dope, more content. But Jenna was quiet, staring at the asylum photos on my laptop, crumbling brick and shattered windows that looked like empty eye sockets. Alex, this feels different. That's because it is different, I said. It's our ticket to another viral video. Ivy stood up abruptly. I won't be part of this. Then leave, I said sharper than I meant to. But this is happening, with or without you. She left, letting the diner door slam behind her. Marco whistled. Damn, you're kind of a dick, you know that? He's not wrong, Jenna said. But I was already pulling up the map on my phone, tracing the route to Hollowbrook. It was 3 hours north, abandoned, and no security. Just us, the dark, and whatever was waiting. Ivy didn't come back. Not that I expected her to. She had ghosted the group chat, left my texts on read, and even Marco, who'd once talked her out of a full-blown panic attack after a raccoon had wandered into our shot. He couldn't even get her to pick up. She'll chill, he said. You know how she gets. All, the veil is thin, and then she's fine by Tuesday. But Tuesday came and went, and so did Wednesday, and by Thursday, I had stopped caring. Hollowbrook Asylum wasn't going to film itself, and the clock was ticking. Sponsors were already breathing down my neck, fans spamming, "Where's the new video?" in the comments. I'd promised a teaser trailer by this weekend, so I buried myself in the research. Late nights hunched over my laptop, Reddit threads filling my browse tabs. The more I dug, the weirder it got. The asylum's history was a graveyard of trigger warnings. It opened in 1903 as a sanitarium for the morally defective, which, in the early 1900s, could mean anything from schizophrenia to liking jazz. The head doctor, a guy named Thomas Hargrove, had a reputation for innovative treatments, which translated to things like ice baths, electroshock therapy, and a basement full of tools that'd make a medieval torturer squeamish. Then in 1972 there was a fire. It started in the east wing, they said. Faulty wiring. But locals swore they heard screams before the flames took hold. 27 people died. Patients, nurses, and even Hargrove himself. The place never reopened. It just sat there rotting while the town tried to forget. But the internet never forgets. You're really doing this, huh? Jenna stood in my doorway, arms crossed, staring at the disaster zone I had turned my apartment into. Printout of the asylum's blueprints, littered all over the floor. My whiteboard was a spiderweb of red strings connecting phrases like mass graves and Hargrove's occult symbols. I'd even tracked down a digitized patient journal from 1965 and printed it out. You mean we're really doing this? And stop looking at me like that. It's called pre-production, I said, squinting at a blurry photo of the asylum's entrance. The doors were boarded up, but someone had spray-painted "Get Out" across the planks. A warning? Or maybe just bored teens. Jenna kicked a stack of papers. This isn't pre-production. This is a serial killer's vision board. Look, the fans want lore, so we're gonna give them lore. I tapped the patient journal. This guy, Sam Teller, wrote about Hargrove taking patients into the basement at night. He said they'd come back changed, hollowed out. One even bit off his own tongue. Cool story, still not worth dying over. We're not gonna die. We'll be in and out, 3 hours max. She sighed, collapsing onto my couch. You didn't see Ivy's face, Alex. She was terrified. Ivy's always terrified. Last month she had visions that Marco's car was cursed. Turns out he just needed new brakes. This feels different. Everything feels different when you're chasing 10 million views. She didn't laugh. I didn't tell her that I had already ordered all brand new top-of-the-line gear. New cameras with better low-light capability, laptops, top-of-the-line voice recorders, all branded, of course. I was in the hole 15 grand on a new credit card I had just opened. This video had to work. The day finally arrived for us to drive to Hollowbrook. The gear prepped was almost fun. Marco brought over the love of his life, his parabolic mic that could hear a mouse fart from 100 yards away, and Jenna calibrated the night vision cameras. I packed the ghost hunting starter kit I had got online a while ago, an EMF meter, IR thermometer, dowsing rods, and a bag of salt. It was actually Ivy's idea, back when she was still answering my calls. I caught myself feeling embarrassed about our gear. We were big time now, the real deal. We needed that new gear. What's this? Marco held up a Ziploc bag full of dried herbs. Sage, I said, for cleansing or whatever. Since when do you believe in that crap? I don't, but the fans eat it up. Remember the live stream where Ivy smudged the doll hospital? The views skyrocketed. He tossed the sage back in the kit. Fake it till you make it, huh? Welcome to YouTube. We finished loading the van around 6 p.m. Just as we were about to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from Ivy. The text was a photo, a symbol carved into stone, 3 overlapping circles, with jagged lines cutting through them. And underneath the photo, her text said, "Stay away. He's not just a ghost." My thumb hovered over the reply button. Marco leaned over my shoulder. Ooh, cryptic ex-colleague alert. You gonna answer? I deleted the message. Nope. Cool, dude. Focus. We've got a haunted asylum to defile. The drive took 3 hours. 3 hours of Jenna snoring in the passenger seat, Marco scrolling through memes, and me white-knuckling the steering wheel. The closer we got, the heavier the silence grew. Even Marco stopped talking when the GPS announced, "Your destination is on the right." Hollowbrook Asylum was in front of us. It looked dead. Not abandoned, but dead. The bricks were blackened from the fire, the windows shattered. Vines were crawling up the walls. The smell hit us before we even opened the doors. A sweet decay, like flowers left too long in the water. "Holy shit," Marco whispered. Jenna turned on her camera. "Rolling." I grabbed my backpack and tried to steady my hands. This is it. This is the shot. The moment. And then the wind kicked up. It wasn't natural. It came in a single violent gust, howling through the asylum's broken windows. And for a second, just a second, I saw it. A shadow in the 3rd-floor window, watching us. "Did you—" Jenna started. "It's just a light playing tricks," I said too quickly. "Probably just a reflection or something." But my phone buzzed again. Another text from Ivy that read, "Too late." I was starting to get annoyed. We didn't talk about the shadow in the window after that. Some unspoken rule kicked in. The same one that makes you laugh at a funeral or whistle in the dark. It was denial, but with better lighting. Marco cranked up the radio as we hauled the gear out of the van, humming along to some pop song about heartbreak. Jenna muttered about lens filters, and I checked my phone one last time. No new text from Ivy, just the old one glaring up at me that said "too late." I stuffed the phone in my pocket. Focus. This is what you wanted. The asylum's front doors were boarded up, but someone had pried the planks loose long ago. The wood creaked as I pulled it aside. Inside, the darkness had texture. It clung to everything and made the air thick. The smell was horrific. Burnt something. I don't know what it was, but it practically punched you in the face as soon as you stepped inside. "Lights," Jenna said, flicking on her headlamp. The beam flooded the dark room. The lobby was a corpse. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, revealing several cracks underneath. There was a reception desk toppled over, its drawers spilling out old papers. Marco nudged a crumpled patient gown with his boot. "Classy place. 5 stars on Yelp." "Quiet," Jenna hissed, adjusting her camera. "We're rolling." I switched on my YouTube voice, that half-whisper every ghost hunter uses to sound both brave and vulnerable. "This is Hollowbrook Asylum, abandoned for over 50 years, but some say the souls trapped here never left." The words even tasted like a script, but the fans loved it. We started in the east wing, where the fire began. The hallway was a black tunnel that swallowed our light. We could hear our footsteps echoing. Every breath we took sounded amplified. But my EMF meter stayed silent. Come on, give me something. Then, in the old surgery room, the temperature dropped. You feel that? Jenna whispered, her camera panning across a bunch of rusted scalpels and a stained operating table. Feel what? Marco said too loud. I feel like I need a tetanus shot. But I felt it. The cold wasn't natural. It hit me under my jacket and gave me chills. I looked at my thermometer and was surprised. 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold spot, I said, trying to force the excitement in my voice. Classic paranormal activity. Jenna zoomed in on the table. Alex, look. There were grooves in the leather restraints, deep ones. They looked like claw marks. Nope, Marco said, backing towards the door. Nope, nope, nope. The EMF meter screamed. A sharp whine with the needle stuck in the red. Jenna's camera light started flickering. Did you get that? Guys? Jenna's voice was steady, but her camera hand shook. Look at the walls. Symbols, the same 3 circles from Ivy's text, carved deep into the plaster. Dozens of them. God, maybe hundreds. Some were old, but others fresh enough that dust hadn't even settled on them. My EMF meter chirped once, like a question. Let's check out the basement, I said. Of course you want to check out the basement, Marco muttered. Jenna whipped toward me. Are you insane? We need proof. Real proof. Proof of what? That we're idiots? Just 5 minutes. If nothing happens, we'll leave. Marco groaned. Famous last words, dude. The stairs to the basement were hidden behind a collapsed wall. The doorway was buried behind debris. It took all 3 of us to shove it aside. The air here was stale, and the smell got worse with each step down. The basement looked like a dungeon. The walls were made of stone and covered with something that looked like algae. It wasn't one room, but many, connected by a maze of corridors. Some of the rooms had drains in the floor that were surrounded by dark stains radiating outward. Others held equipment that I didn't recognize. Metal frames with too many joints, and tables with grooves for fluids. Home sweet home, Marco muttered, but the joke fell flat. We searched each room and eventually we found Dr. Hargrove's office. The door had been locked from the inside, but 50 years had rotted the wood and made it soft. Inside, filing cabinets stood open, papers scattered everywhere. And on the desk was a leather journal. Jenna's camera flickered back on, the night vision giving off its usual green light. We're rolling, she said hesitantly. I opened it. Hargrove's handwriting was precise, clinical. There were patient names and treatment notes. And then, towards the end, the writing changed, became more frantic. The same phrase repeated. They're still here with me, in the walls. The EMF meter screamed, and I really did almost piss myself. Jesus, I've never heard it make that noise before. It scared the shit out of me. I raised the EMF meter up to take a look at it, but it was dead. The thermometer was dead too. Guys, all of our gear is... A door slammed upstairs, and then another, a cascade of slamming racing toward us. What's that? Marco yelled. The answer came fast and we didn't like it. It was the sound of the basement door slamming shut, hard. The thud shook the dust from the ceiling. Jenna's camera almost dropped as we bolted for the stairs. No, 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 Marco chanted, yanking at the door. But it didn't budge. Kick it, Jenna shouted. We threw ourselves against the door, but it wouldn't move. It was almost as if it had fused itself shut. I slammed my fist against the door, and in the moment of silence that followed, my heart stopped. I could hear something. Slow footsteps, coming in our direction. We all turned at once. The green glow of Jenna's camera lit the room just enough for us to see it. A shadow pooling at the end of the hall, not cast by anything. It pushed itself upward, forming into a tall, human-like shape. Oh God, Jenna breathed. The EMF meter suddenly came to life in my hand, screeching like a dying animal, just as the shadow lunged towards us. We ran, not towards the door but away, down a corridor we hadn't seen before. It was half collapsed. Marco tripped, cursing as his knee slammed into a stone. Jenna dragged him up, her camera somehow still rolling. My lungs were burning. The EMF noise chased us as the shadow's presence got stronger. We burst into a room. A chapel? Maybe, with broken pews and a shattered stained glass window. The moonlight wasn't strong, but it was enough for us to see a path to another door, an exit. We ran into the room, slamming the door behind us. There, I yelled. Marco reached the door first, yanking the handle. It creaked open, revealing not the night sky as it should have, but another hallway. I managed to eke out the words, "What the hell?" in between gasps of air. This isn't the way out, Jenna whispered. The EMF meter in my hand screeched again, the sound echoing off the walls. And behind us, the shadow had seeped under the door we had just slammed, pooling on the floor like spilt ink. It doesn't matter. Marco shoved Jenna and me through the door and into the hall. Move! The basement became a nightmare of wrong turns and dead ends, hallways that led to rooms we had already passed, stairs climbing to solid ceilings. The building kept rearranging itself. Rooms multiplied, and corridors stretched and contracted. And behind us that thing followed, not running and not walking, moving like smoke with purpose. As we ran, Jenna's camera light bounced wildly, catching glimpses of symbols carved into the stone, 3 overlapping circles, slashed through with what looked like marks from claws. Finally, we collapsed into a storage closet, barricading the door with a splintered shelf. Marco's phone buzzed. A text lit up the dark. From Ivy. "Don't listen to him." Jenna pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, the shelf against the door shuddered. Something scratched slowly across the wood. And then a raspy voice tried to speak from the other side. I said tried because as soon as I realized it was trying to speak, I started screaming and banging on the door, trying my best not to listen to it. The others thought I was losing it, but when they realized why I was acting that way, we started taking turns, every time the thing tried to speak to us. We were trapped in that asylum, lost in that messed up labyrinth for 6 hours. 6 hours of banging on the door and screaming at the top of our lungs, every time that thing tried to speak. None of us could get any rest. We weren't even sure if what Ivy had said about not listening to it was true, but we weren't in a position to try to find out. Ivy found us just after dawn. How she got in, I don't know. No flashlight, no gear, just a jar of ash and a key to a door we hadn't seen before. Apparently she'd spent the whole night having nightmares and didn't even remember sending the texts. She only realized that something had happened when she saw the text messages in the morning. She dragged us down a corridor smeared with bloody handprints. She moved through the asylum like she belonged there, carrying a mason jar full of ash and speaking words that made no sense. She led us through passages I swear weren't there before. "Don't look back," she said. But I looked. I heard something whisper my name. "Alex." And I turned around. A towering silhouette in a charred uniform, skin dripping like wax from his bones, his face half melted, his jaw unhinged, and his eyes were 2 black voids. The cleaver in his hand crusted with rust, and other things I didn't want to name. He took a step forward and the walls bled. "Alex." I screamed loud enough to drown him out. I quit the next morning, deleted the channel, burned all of our gear and the SD cards with all the footage in a steel drum behind my building. The flames ate my logo, my merch, the stupid sage bundles I'd never believed in. After that, Marco wouldn't speak. Jenna deleted every photo off of her phone and scrubbed her skin raw in the shower. Me? I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, that shadow standing in front of me, raising a cleaver. "Alex." He'd hiss and I'd wake up screaming, trying not to listen. Some stories, once started, never really end. They just wait for the next chapter, the next fool with a camera, the person who thinks fear is just content. But I know better now. Fear is a door. And some doors, once opened, stay open, even if you burn the key. They said it would be an easy gig. The Blackwood Psychiatric Facility had been shut down for almost a year. They closed it after the patients started to riot and a nurse was killed. Everyone pretty much just picked up and left, abandoning the place like it was cursed. The owners ended up being convicted of neglect and abuse, and were ultimately responsible for causing the conditions that led to the riot. The state took it over, but it's government property now, so of course nothing's happened. A few weeks ago, someone broke in and tried to steal equipment and ransacked the place looking for medications, probably to sell them. That's why I'm here. The county hired the security company I work for to monitor the place until they figure it out. My boss told me not to worry about all the medical stuff. County's sending someone over to deal with all of that. He waved his hand dismissively. A nurse, I think. So that was that. Cool, easy money. I arrived that first night at 10 p.m. I immediately set my stuff down next to the monitors at the security desk and started making my rounds. I headed towards the old East Wing where the riot happened. That's where I saw her. Short silver curls, thick glasses perched on her nose, and dark blue scrubs that had seen better days. The dim beam of my flashlight caught her ID badge. Nurse Wallace. She looked exhausted, frazzled, and didn't even acknowledge me when I said hi. She mumbled something like, "Damn it, I love my job, but this is gonna be the death of me," and then just scuttled away down the hall. I didn't question it. I figured she was just overwhelmed by all of the mess, so I just continued my rounds. I did not want to make enemies with this woman, so I left her alone, but I made sure to keep an eye on her through the security monitors. She was always moving, always busy. She would be in the medroom, then she'd be flipping through binders, and then she'd be reading charts. I could tell she must have been some kind of supervisor at one point in her career. At 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. The motion sensor in the hall triggered. On the grainy feed I saw a figure moving between the rooms, with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this place. It was not Nurse Wallace. It was someone else. I grabbed my flashlight and my firearm and rushed towards the East Wing. "Security!" I called out, pushing open the double doors. "Show yourself!" A younger woman wearing dark blue scrubs emerged from one of the rooms, startled and clutching a clipboard to her chest. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm supposed to be here. The county hired me to come sort through the old charts because I used to work here. I had car problems, that's why I'm so late." After a moment, when we both calmed down and started to relax, I tried to break the tension. "Well," I chuckled, "I'm glad you're finally here. That old nurse could use some help. She's been running around here frazzled all night." "What nurse?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Nurse Wallace. Short gray hair, glasses, been here all night." "That's impossible," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Nurse Wallace was the charge nurse here. She died during the riot. She was found right there." She pointed to the nurse's station where I had first seen the old woman. "She loved her job. She was a good nurse," she said, choking back the tears. "But it ended up being the death of her." Something was testing my tent. Not the wind. The wind doesn't press fabric with such deliberate curiosity. This was methodical, a careful exploration of boundaries. The nylon bulged inward near my head, was held for a long moment, and then released. The same patient pressure moved to my feet, along the side of the tent, and then around to the back. I laid perfectly still, listening to the heavy breathing that wasn't mine. That was 7 years ago in the Manistee National Forest, when I set out to disprove the myth of the Michigan Dogman. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should start at the beginning. It was 2017, and I was still making YouTube videos then. My channel was debunking urban legends with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been afraid. The Michigan Dogman was supposed to be just another case to close, another myth to explain away with rational thought and proper lighting. The legend of the Michigan Dogman goes back to 1887, a lumberjack's tale about a creature with a man's body and a dog's head. The stories resurface in cycles, always peaking in years ending with 7. 2017 was already thick and fresh with sightings when I decided to investigate. It was perfect. I drove up on a Thursday in late October. The trees were skeletal against the gray skies, their branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. At the ranger station, an older man with weathered hands processed my camping permit. "Lot of activity lately," he said without looking up. "What kind of activity?" I asked. "The kind that makes things move when they should be still." His eyes met mine briefly. They held the weight of someone who'd stopped asking and answering certain questions years ago. The trail stretched deeper than my map suggested. The further in I hiked, the canopy grew thicker and older, until afternoon light became something filtered and strange. I'd planned to reach the campsite by sunset, but the forest had other plans. The quiet started around mile 3, not a peaceful silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums like you're underwater. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small animal life in the underbrush, just my footsteps on dead leaves and the whisper of the wind through the bones of the trees. The absence of noise almost felt deliberate, something that had been orchestrated just for my arrival. But that's when I began to feel watched. It started as a prickle at the base of my neck between my shoulder blades, the sensation of eyes tracking your movement, measuring your pace, and cataloging your weaknesses. I turned around several times, camera ready, but found only empty trail behind me. Trees standing sentinel and their shadows pooling on the ground like spilled ink, but nothing more. But the feeling persisted and grew stronger. The weight of attention followed me like a physical presence. My peripheral vision became hyperactive, catching movements that shouldn't exist, a branch swaying against still air, or a shadow falling in the wrong direction, and even the outline of something large shifting just beyond the tree line. "What's wrong with me?" I muttered under my breath. I had been living in legends and accounts of the Dogman in preparation for this. I guess all of that research and all those stories, they were starting to get to me. It had to be. I'd read dozens of accounts of ordinary people claiming to see the creature in this same forest before coming here. Absorbed every detail of the reported sightings. The mind plays tricks when it's primed to see monsters. But there was something about this place that felt wrong. Not just unwelcoming, but territorial. Like I was trespassing on somebody else's property. I'd done this dozens of times before, hiked into dark forests to uncover the truth, to show the world that natural phenomena can seem supernatural when you don't understand what's happening. Fear feeds ignorance, and knowledge brings light. That's the theory, anyway. Movement flickered constantly now at the edge of my vision, quick shadows that vanished when I turned to look, a shape that might have been a tree stump, until I blinked and I found it 20 feet closer, and then it was gone entirely. The forest was playing tricks, I told myself. Light and shadow, fatigue and expectation. The human brain evolved to find patterns in chaos, to see predators in every rustling bush. Survival instinct, masquerading as supernatural experience. The rational mind builds such neat explanations. But explanations don't account for the way my heart was hammering against my ribs, or why every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to turn around, to leave this place to whatever had claimed it. Some knowledge, I was beginning to suspect, might not be worth having. Around mile 4 the footsteps began. Not my own. Those I knew. heavy and deliberate on the packed earth. These were lighter and more careful. They matched my rhythm at first, step for step, like a careful dance partner learning the choreography. When I stopped to check my GPS, they stopped too. Perfect silence. When I resumed walking, the footsteps were gone. Whatever it was must have found a new game trail and moved on. There are plenty of wild animals in these woods. Most likely one was just checking me out. But still, I started to walk faster. And then came the first howl. It started somewhere beneath my ability to hear. A vibration felt in the chest before it climbed to a pitch that made primitive parts of my brain recoil. Not quite wolf, not quite coyote. Something older, with an undertone that sounded almost conversational. Almost like it was amused. As if whatever made that sound was enjoying our little game of follow the leader. The howl lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted them, my mind grasping for any detail that might make sense of what I was hearing. I stopped walking. The forest swallowed the sound and gave nothing back but the pressing quiet. Even the footsteps had ceased. In the silence that followed, I heard my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, heard the whisper of the wind through the dead leaves, and heard the distant crack of a branch under considerable weight. Something was moving out there. 7 years later, and I can still hear that howl in my dreams, but it's the silence afterward that haunts me the most. The trail markers became sparse after that. Ancient trees pressed in closer, their trunks thick enough to hide entire conversations. This was where most of the reports originated, deep in the forest's memory. I found the first claw marks carved into an oak tree about 7 feet up. 4 parallel gouges, each 2 inches long, exposing the white wood underneath. The spacing suggested something with paws larger than any creature that should exist in Michigan. I filmed everything, explaining to my future audience how bears might create similar marks. Black bears do mark territory by clawing trees, I said to the camera, my voice steady with professional confidence. The height could be explained by the bear rearing up on its hind legs. Perspective can be deceiving in a dense forest. But even as I spoke, something nagged at me. The marks were too uniform and deliberate. When a bear claws at tree bark marking its territory, it leaves rough, jagged tears. These gouges looked almost purposeful, like something that had taken its time. I measured the spacing between the marks, 7 inches from first claw to fourth. I pulled up photos on my phone of documented bear claw marks from wildlife sites. Michigan black bears averaged 4 to 5 inches between outer claws. I kept filming anyway. Environmental factors could account for the spacing, I told the camera, though my voice had lost some of its certainty. Older trees, different bark texture, even the angle of the approach. The rational explanations felt thinner with each word. The footprints appeared where a creek crossed the trail, large, canine-shaped, but showing what looked like a bipedal gait that made something cold crawl up my spine. Front paws touched down occasionally for balance, but the primary locomotion came from the powerful rear legs. I knelt beside the clearest print, pulling out my measuring tape. These could be overlapping tracks, I explained to the camera. Multiple animals using the same crossing point. What appears to be a bipedal gait to most people is most likely several different sets of prints. What I didn't say to the audience was that the mud told a different story. The impressions were clean and distinct, a single animal moving with purpose. The rear print showed deep heel strikes and clear toe definition. The occasional front paw prints were smaller, positioned where something might reach out for balance while trying to walk upright. I photographed everything, took measurements, and made detailed notes. The scientific method in action: document, analyze, and explain. The prints were fresh, maybe hours old, could be less, and they followed the trail I was walking. Coincidental travel patterns, I murmured to myself, not bothering with the camera this time. Animals often use human trails for easier passage through dense forest, I said, mainly trying to convince myself. My campsite was a small clearing beside a narrow stream, sheltered by ancient pines that had been watching this place longer than the stories. I set up my tent with mechanical precision, arranged my equipment in careful patterns, set up the trail cameras, and built a fire using techniques I'd learned years ago. The routine felt normal, everything was explainable, and I began to relax. As I worked, I found myself narrating to the camera again. The psychological effect of spending time alone in wilderness areas is well documented. Isolation, unfamiliar sounds, the absence of artificial light, all these factors can contribute to the heightened anxiety and a misperception of normal phenomena as paranormal. The words felt like a shield against the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. As darkness settled, the howling began again, but this time it was much closer. I reached for my camera immediately, but my hands were shaking slightly as I adjusted the settings. Coyotes are common in this region, I said, though the sound seemed to come from something much larger. Their vocalizations can carry for miles, and often sound closer and more threatening than they actually are. The howl came again, even closer now. I cleared my throat and continued. Audio recording equipment can also amplify and distort natural sounds, making them seem more unusual than they actually are. Some explanations, I began to realize, weren't explanations at all. They were just words we use to avoid facing what we can't understand. It was closer now, much closer, and underneath the sound something that made my hands shake as I adjusted my camera settings again, a rhythm that sounded disturbingly like laughter. I turned on every light I had. LED panels created a bright island in an ocean of black, but somehow made the surrounding darkness feel more alive. Beyond my lights, the forest held its breath. The minutes stretched, and an hour passed without sound. I flipped the camera around to my face and pressed record, whispering to keep from disturbing whatever peace had settled over the campsite. It's been quiet for the last hour. Most likely that was a bear or a wolf investigating the area. Probably moved on when I lit up the camp. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Standard behavior for curious wildlife. Bright lights typically deter most animals. I paused, listening to the silence beyond my illuminated circle. Though the vocalizations were unusual, could be territorial calls I'm not familiar with. Northern Michigan has wolves, but their patterns don't usually... I trailed off, realizing I was talking to fill the quiet, to convince myself as much as any future audience. The camera kept recording. In the viewfinder I could see my own face, pale, tired, eyes darting occasionally towards the darkness behind me. "I'm going to keep the lights on tonight," I finally said. "For documentation purposes." The camera and I both knew that wasn't the real reason. The footsteps started at midnight, heavy, deliberate, circling just outside my illuminated sanctuary. Branches snapped with purpose, leaves rustled in patterns too regular to be the wind. The sounds would come from the east, and then silence, and then resume from the north, and always just beyond sight, always watching. I filmed everything, whispering commentary to the camera that suddenly felt inadequate. "Probably just investigating the campfire," I said, though at that point the fire had died to embers. "Could be territorial behavior." The circling continued, methodical and patient, and then the growling started. Low and continuous, intelligent. Not the warning of a curious animal, but the deliberate intimidation of something that understood fear, and something that enjoyed it. I gripped my camera and tried to peer beyond the lights. The growling was close enough that I should see breath in the cold air, or the reflection of eyes, or some hint of movement. But I saw nothing. The growling continued, and underneath it I began to hear something else. A sound like breathing, but wrong. It was too deep and too measured, like something large trying very hard to be quiet. And that's when I saw it. Just for a moment, at the very edge of my vision, something tall moved between the trees, upright and broader than any man, with a silhouette that belonged in nightmares. It paused there, perfectly still, as if considering me. I swung my camera toward the movement, but the space was empty now. But I could still feel it watching. The growling eventually stopped, and what followed was absolute silence, the kind that makes you understand how small you are in the vast dark of the world. I waited, lights blazing, camera ready, for something to happen, but nothing did. And somehow that was worse. After an hour of that terrible patience, I crawled into my tent, kept one camera running, pointed at the tent flap. The sleeping bag felt thin as paper against whatever was out there, learning the boundaries of my shelter. The fabric walls might as well have been tissue. Sleep came in fragments until the careful testing began. It started with a single touch, pressure against the back wall of my tent. A gentle, curious finger. The nylon dimpled inward, held for a heartbeat and then released. I laid perfectly still, barely breathing, as whatever it was began its methodical exploration. The systematic pressure moved along every surface, the back wall, the side panels, the space near my feet. Each touch was deliberate and measured, learning the dimensions of my refuge, testing the boundaries between safety and the dark. Through the thin material I could hear it breathing, deep and controlled exhalations just inches from my face, the controlled breathing of something completely at ease, and at some points underneath the breathing, a sound almost like purring, but it was the other sound that nearly broke me. Between the careful touches, between the measured breaths, I heard something that should not exist in this situation. Laughter. Not human laughter. Something deeper, more guttural. The sound of amusement tinged with anticipation, as if whatever crouched outside my tent found my terror delightful. As if this entire encounter was exactly what it had hoped for. The laughing came in soft bursts, always just after a particularly bold touch against the tent wall, as if it could sense my fear spiking and found the reaction entertaining. I pressed my hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. The camera kept recording, its red light a tiny beacon in the suffocating darkness, evidence of something that no one would believe. The testing continued for 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Methodical pressure, controlled breathing, that terrible satisfying purring, and always threading through it all, that low rumbling laughter that spoke of an intelligence far beyond animal curiosity. And then abruptly it stopped. The silence that followed was complete. No breathing, no movement, no sound at all. but the feeling of the presence remained. Whatever had spent those minutes learning the geography of my shelter was still there, was still watching, maybe deciding. I waited in that silence until the first gray hints of dawn began filtering through the tent walls. Only then did I work up the courage to move. When I finally unzipped the tent flap, the dawn was filtering through the trees. The campsite looked exactly as I had left it. No tracks in the soft earth, no bent grass, and no physical evidence that anything had been there. But the nylon walls of my tent told a different story. It was covered in handprints. Large, impossibly detailed impressions pressed into the fabric from the outside. Not paw prints, handprints. 4 fingers and an opposable thumb, but elongated, with what looked like claw marks on each fingertip. Dozens of them, covering every surface that had been touched during those 10 minutes of methodical exploration. I photographed them all before packing, evidence that something had been there, something with hands that had spent the night, learning the exact dimensions of my temporary sanctuary. I packed in record time, abandoning plans for the second night. The hike out felt different, not like leaving, but like being escorted. I could feel the tension on my back the entire 3 hours, patient and amused, following just out of sight. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car. The scratches were there waiting for me. 4 parallel lines carved deep into the driver's side door, cutting through the paint to the bare metal. Fresh scratches, with spacing identical to the marks on the tree, was a calling card and a reminder. I uploaded the footage that evening. The video went viral, drawing believers and skeptics in equal measure. Each group had found their own truth in what I had recorded. There were comments from true believers that I had found the Michigan Dogman, and there were just as many, if not more, who were positive the whole thing was faked. What I never mentioned was the trail camera, the one that I had forgotten about until I got home and started transferring files. There were 3 images, captured in sequence around 3:47 a.m. The first showed empty forest, infrared shadows between dark trees. The second showed movement at the edge of the frame, something tall stepping into view. The third I've never shown anyone, and I never will. It stood just beyond the camera's reach, patient in the darkness, upright and watching. The proportions were wrong in ways that made it difficult to look at. It was tall, its arms were long, and had that distinctive silhouette that belonged in stories, not photographs. But it was the expression that haunts me, even through the grainy night vision, even across 7 years of trying to forget. I can still remember that look. It wasn't the look of surprise at being caught on camera. It was a look of recognition, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along, as if it knew I would never share what I found with anyone. Some evidence isn't meant for this world to see, and some legends were never meant to be debunked. They were meant to keep us away.